The emissaries of the Dark Reverie arrived and announced the final test of the primeval battlefield would be started a month from now. The entire city was stirred, and the atmosphere instantly became nervous. The disciples of the various powers that had entered Primeval City chose to enter closed-door cultivation, and they cultivated strenuously for the sake of making preparations to greet the final test. At the central part of the northeast area was an expanse of overgrown weeds, and only a single stone tablet stood towering there. The stone tablet was 1.5 m in height and 0.65 m in width. Its surface was mottled and dark with dark brown-colored moss and green-colored moss stretching all over, and it emitted an ancient and aged aura. This is the Battle Vow Tablet, a tablet left behind during the primeval times. All those years ago, for the sake of resisting their enemies, the gods buried numerous treasures in the 8 areas of Primeval City, and every single one of them is more formidable than an immortal artifact. Every time the final test of the primeval battlefield arrives, a treasure like this would emerge from the ground of all the 8 areas. Moreover, the one who's able to obtain the treasure would surely be the one who was in control of the area. The reason behind this is this Battle Vow Tablet. Xianxia had an extraordinary bearing, and his snow-white hair fluttered as he raised his hand to point towards the stone tablet before him and spoke with a light voice. "This is the place the gods vowed to do battle?" The nearby Xianxia gazed at the stone tablet and was able to clearly notice the word, "Battle Vow," on the surface of the stone tablet. It was written with vigorous strokes and a natural style, and it emitted an oppressive aura. Most astonishing of it all was the color of the words. It was actually written with blood and branded onto the stone tablet, causing the bloody aura of battle and slaughter to assault their faces. At this moment, Xianxia faintly felt as if he was within the battle of the gods, and before him lay countless skeletons, rivers of blood, and mountains of corpses. Over 1,000,000 cries of battle covered the heavens and the earth like thunderclaps that surged down from the 9 heavens, and it caused him to be practically suffocated and drenched in cold sweat. Terrifying. Even though it has experienced the corrosion of countless years, the words on this stone tablet seem as if they'd just been inscribed, and it possesses a horrifying aura of battle that seems breathtaking. Be careful. You must not inspect the Battle Vow Tablet with your divine sense. Otherwise, you'll be directly annihilated by the battle intent of the gods contained within it. Even an earthly immortal realm expert is unable to survive it. Xianxia warned from the side with a serious expression. At this moment, it wasn't just the expression of Xianxia that went pale. Even Huangfu Qingying and the others went pale, and their gazes carried a trace of deep awe as they looked at the Battle Vow Tablet. Since the treasures left behind by the gods are buried beneath the Battle Vow Tablet, could it be that the gods weren't afraid that others would dig out and take away the treasures? Young Master Zhou couldn't help but ask. Dig them out and take them? Xianxia chuckled and shook his head as he said, "Impossible. With the Battle Vow Tablet's presence, even a heavenly immortal is incapable of taking away a single treasure of the gods." When he spoke up to hear, a trace of recollection suffused his eyes as he sighed. After all those gods of the primeval times were supreme existences that were capable of easily shaking the 3 dimensions. The treasures they left behind have transformed into a part of the primeval battlefield since long ago. If it wasn't like this, all the treasures here would have been taken away long ago, and how could they possibly be able to continue existing through the countless years until now? A wisp of wonder couldn't help but arise in the hearts of everyone when they heard this. Just the treasures they left behind were capable of making heavenly immortals be unable to take them away, so exactly how formidable were the gods of the primeval times. But there's an exception. A frightening and sudden event occurs every 100 years in the primeval battlefield. At that time, one treasure of the gods would emerge from each of the 8 areas within Primeval City, and it would choose the person that controls the area to defend Primeval City from destruction. To all of you, the day this frightening and sudden event erupts is the day the final test begins. Xianxia said slowly. We emissaries came from the Dark Reverie for the sake of assisting all of you to obtain the treasures of the gods, pass the test, and enter the Dark Reverie. In other words, only those that pass the test are able to enter the Dark Reverie. Then what about those that don't pass the test? Xianxia couldn't help but ask. Yun Lansheng went silent for a moment before lightly spitting out a single word. Dead. Everyone was instantly horrified. Dead? Did they die from competing with others? Or did they die from the sudden event? But the test this time is slightly special. With your strengths, all of you don't have to worry about any mishaps occurring. When he spoke up to hear, Yun Lansheng pondered briefly before he shook his head and said, "Never mind. All of you will understand after the test begins. I can only tell all of you that the number of disciples that were able to enter the dark reverie this time will exceed any of the prior years." "Why? Senior, can you slightly leak some information so that we can be prepared?" Young Master Zhou pursued curiously. Yun Lansheng was slightly hesitant. "These things are too far away from all of you. It makes no difference even if all of you know, and it would instead affect your states of mind." Even though everyone was mentally prepared since the beginning, they couldn't help but feel a wave of disappointment when they heard this answer. "Humph. What's there that can't be said? Isn't it just because the upheaval of the 3 dimensions is at hand, and the dark reverie isn't peaceful now? Everyone in the cultivation world feels insecure, so they relaxed the restrictions and started widely recruiting disciples to madly strengthen their forces." Right at this moment, the dirty madman Lu suddenly appeared, and he ate meat and drank wine while muttering with an unclear voice. If it wasn't because of this, 99% of the young people in this city would probably be eliminated in the coming test, just like how it was in the past. The upheaval of the 3 dimensions, the members of the various powers of the dark reverie feel insecure? Xianxia and the others were instantly shocked in their hearts. They'd had various guesses before this, yet never had they imagined that the answer would actually be so terrifying and actually involve the upheaval of the 3 dimensions. The 3 dimensions meant the mortal dimension, the immortal dimension, and the netherworld. Moreover, these 3 dimensions included countless large and minor worlds, and the scope they referred to was simply boundlessly vast to an unimaginable level. For example, the mortal dimension contained 3,000 large worlds, as well as millions upon millions of minor worlds. The races and species born within these countless worlds were more than just millions upon millions. Not to mention the immortal dimension and netherworld, they similarly possessed various strange and unusual planes and species. Yet now, a calamity was actually capable of involving the entire 3 dimensions. Even if Xianxi's current state of mind had already been tempered to the point of being firm like a rock, he was still unable to restrain from having a tempestuous storm arise within his heart after hearing this, and he was unable to calm down for a long time. Yun Lansheng couldn't help but laugh bitterly without end when he saw the changes in everyone's expressions. Only this crazy old fellow would dare speak about this freely. Huh? But since it had already been said, he couldn't conceal anything anymore as well, and he had no choice but to console them. "But all of you don't have to bear any burden in your hearts. Almighty figures in the dark reverie have deduced that there are another 1,000 years before the upheaval of the 3 dimensions, and it's extremely far away to all of you. Not to mention, even if the heavens collapse, there would be someone to lift it up. Presently, all of you only have to do a single thing, and that is to concentrate on cultivating and quickly make yourselves stronger." That's correct. To you or me, 1,000 years might pass by just from a period of cultivation to these little fellows. They still have a long path to take, so they don't have to be alarmed. Madman Lu actually acted contrary to his normal behavior and had a rare moment of agreeing to what Yun Lansheng had said. Xianxia and the others unconsciously heaved a sigh of relief. There was another 1,000 years before the upheaval of the 3 dimensions, and so long as they seized this time to make sufficient preparations, then they wouldn't have to be too alarmed. After all, every single one of them was still young, and their cultivations had already attained the rebirth realm. 1,000 years of time was sufficient for them to experience an extremely great leap in their cultivation. Of course, the precondition was that they were able to survive. According to what Yun Lansheng said, the battle vow tablet required one to drip their blood onto it and establish ownership of it. Only in this way would one be able to be acknowledged as the person that controls this area. Moreover, only in this way would one have the opportunity to obtain a treasure of the gods after the final test ended. Besides that, the method of establishing ownership was known to only the emissaries of the dark reverie. This was also why all the cultivators in the city knew of the existence of the Battle Vow tablet, yet none of them paid attention to it. As one of the emissaries of the Dark Reverie, Yun Lanxing naturally knew the method, but the opinion of Chen Shi and the others varied towards the person that would establish ownership of it. As far as Huangfu Qingying, Qing Shui, Fan Yunlan, and the others were concerned, no matter if it was reputation or cultivation, this opportunity ought to belong to Chen Shi. Perhaps, in their hearts, only Chen Shi possessed the prestige to obtain the treasure of the gods in the end. This was a type of trust that had arisen from experiencing countless incidents in time, and another might not be able to attain such a height. In other words, Chen Shi seemed to have already become the leading figure amongst all the disciples of the Darchu dynasty now, and he couldn't be replaced. But Chen Shi refused, and he decided in the end. Let the young princess establish ownership of it. It wasn't that he didn't want to obtain a treasure that the gods left behind, but he had too many treasures in his possession, and he utterly didn't need one more. Moreover, he had other arrangements. After the final test ended, all of them would be entering the Dark Reverie, and at that time it would perhaps be the time they would have to be separated temporarily. So he wanted to prepare a gift for all of these companions that had fought with him and gone through thick and thin with him. No matter what, all of them were his companions from the Darchu dynasty. Even if they'd entered the Dark Reverie, it would still be like this, so compared to the friendship between them, some treasures were utterly nothing. Treasures could still be found, yet the loss of friendship would be a regret in one's life. Chen Shi's decision didn't just cause Qing Shui, Zhenlu Qing, Fan Yunlan, young Master Zhou, Lingyu, and Zhao Qinghe to be surprised. Even the person concerned, Huangfu Qingying, had an astounded expression that couldn't be concealed on her face. No one had expected that Chen Shi would actually give away such a great opportunity, and he'd done it so readily and so generously. On the other hand, Yun Lansheng and Madman Lu were shocked, and they felt it was extremely strange. After all, that was a treasure of the gods, and it was even more formidable than an immortal artifact. Even they who were earthly immortal realm experts felt extremely envious towards this, yet Chen Shi had actually given it away so readily and without the slightest hesitation, so how could they not be surprised? Chen Shi you? Huangfu Qingying was dazed and at a loss for what to do. We've all come from the Darchu dynasty and received too much kindness from His Majesty Emperor Chu, yet always had no way of repaying him. Receive this opportunity in His Majesty's place. Chen Shi smiled and teased. Everyone else was stunned before nodding in unison, as they respected Chen Shi's decision. Huangfu Qingying was extremely touched in her heart, and her eyes actually faintly went red as tears almost trickled down from her eyes. She knew that Chen Shi said this only because he didn't want her to feel ill at ease when receiving this gift. Chen Shi smiled as he patted Huangfu Qingying on the shoulder. In the next moment, 3 treasures that flowed with multicolored lights appeared with a flip of his hand. One was a blade that was translucent like snow, another was a large seal that emitted a lofty and heavy aura, and the final treasure was a sword that was glossy like an expanse of limpid water in autumn. It was precisely the Snow Dragon blade, the Mountain Form seal, and the Sky Sorrow sword. Everyone was stunned. This fellow Chen Shi is too unusual today. What does he want to do now? In the next moment, Chen Shi had already revealed the answer. I have no use of these 3 magic treasures. This Snow Dragon blade is suitable for Qinghe. His attacks are violent, strong, and peerlessly fierce. This Mountain Form seal is suitable for Lingyu, as it uses strength to crush the strength of others and is matchlessly ferocious. This Sky Sorrow sword is suitable for young Master Zhou, as it possesses sword insight that's like the sky and is extraordinarily agile. As he spoke, he pushed the 3 treasures into the hands of the 3 dumbstruck fellows without allowing the slightest refusal. These are 3 quasi-immortal artifacts, treasures that even earthly immortal realm experts covet extremely, yet Chen Shi is giving it to us just like this. At this moment, Zhao Qinghe and the others felt their hearts were trembling. They felt both shock and disbelief, and the treasure in their hands felt heavy and difficult to accept. They repeatedly refused, yet Chen Shi only shook his head and maintained a firm attitude. Perhaps to others, a quasi-immortal artifact was more precious than their lives, and they treasured it extraordinarily if they were able to obtain even a single one. But to Xianxia, even though a quasi-immortal artifact was precious, it was far inferior to how important friendship was to him. At the very least, after the three of them obtained the treasures, their strengths would once again obtain an obvious increase, and if they encountered danger in the future, they would possess a certain level of ability to protect themselves, so he didn't have to worry about them anymore. The entire day of battles earlier had allowed Xianxia to deeply understand a principle. He was forever unable to rescue and assist all his companions that were in difficulty by merely relying on himself, and he would only be free of worries when they themselves became formidable. Furthermore, once the quality of the talisman armament was increased, he did indeed have no use for these treasures. Even though he possessed numerous treasures, if he was unable to utilize all of them, then it would be no different than wasting God's given gifts. Brother Chun, thank you for this kindness. Xianxia took a deep breath as he looked at Xianxia with a firm gaze. Even though his words were simply, yet they revealed a resolute feeling that showed willingness to lay down his life if Xianxia was in trouble. I really don't know what to say about you. Never mind, in any case you're my brother for life, and I won't leave even if you kick me away. Young Master Zhou hammered Xianxia's shoulder fiercely before he grinned. This? The nearby Ling Yu scratched his head and had a silly smile on his face, and then he said weakly, I'm just like young Master Zhou, you understand. You fatty. You actually dared to copy the sincere words this young master strained his heart and mind to come up with. You truly deserve a beating. Young Master Zhou cried out as he kneaded Ling Yu's chubby face like he was kneading dough. Ling Yu couldn't take it and hurriedly dodged to the side while crying out from feeling wronged. Strained your heart and mind? I didn't see you bleed or seem fatigued. You're obviously a liar. Fatty, how can you speak like that? You insist on me showing all that to you? Just you wait. I'll surely make a stew out of you. Young Master Zhou turned angry from embarrassment, and he chased after Ling Yu. This little fellow really doesn't have any class. The meat of a fatty is sour and stinky, and it tastes extremely bad, yet he actually wants to stew and eat this fatty. His preferences in taste are stronger than me. Madman Lu chucked at the side. Everyone roared with laughter. After the treasures were distributed, Xianxia felt much more relaxed. Their Darchu dynasty was only an ordinary dynasty, and besides himself, Qing Shui and Jin Lu Qing, the strengths of the others were slightly inferior to the experts of first-rate dynasties, let alone comparing with the disciples of top dynasties and prestigious clans. The ranking in the measurement of the Warsoul tablet was mostly the recognition of their potential, and they were still slightly inferior if they were only compared in terms of strength. But after they gained possession of a quasi-immortal artifact, Xianxia believed that the strength of every single one of them would obtain a substantial increase, and even if it was in the final test of the primeval battlefield, they would be entirely capable of going against the top experts of the various dynasties. Huangfu Qingying stayed back, as she had to obtain the recognition of the Battle Vow tablet under the assistance of Yun Lanxing, whereas Xianxia and the others headed away from here. Both of you aren't dissatisfied, right? On the way, Xianxia sent a voice transmission to Jin Lu Qing and Qing Shui with a voice that carried a trace of an apologetic tone. He'd given most of the quasi-immortal artifacts to Zhao Qinghe and the others, while the chance to obtain the treasure left behind by the gods was given to Huangfu Qingying, yet he didn't prepare anything for the two of them, causing him to feel slightly sorry. But there was nothing he could do because there was only the flaming peacock fan and golden dragon armor in his possession. The flaming peacock fan was a main material to refine the flame god fan, and only one that had grasped the grand Tao of fire was capable of bringing out its entire might, causing it to be unsuitable for the two of them. Because according to his knowledge, even though Qing Shui had comprehended the grand Tao of fire, she'd merely comprehended it and had no intention to develop it because she focused mainly on the grand Tao of light. On the other hand, Zhen Lu Qing was a possessor of the primeval water soul body, and she possessed an extremely high mastery of the grand Taos of water and darkness, so the flaming peacock fan wasn't suitable for her either. As for the golden dragon armor, it was a treasure that was worn by a male, and they would probably not wear it even if he gave it to them. Qing Shui shook her head. Zhen Lu Qing feigned bitterness as she glared at Xianxia before she said with a pitiful tone, "You ungrateful fellow. You've only thought of us now? This won't do, you have to give us a quasi-immortal artifact each." As she finished speaking, She herself couldn't help but burst into laughter, and she seemed to feel that being able to tease Chun, she was an extremely interesting thing. Chun, she rubbed his nose with embarrassment. Even though he'd perceived that Jinlu Qing and Qing Shui didn't mind, he was still slightly sorry in his heart, and he pondered for a moment and said, "Why not?" Jinlu Qing interrupted him. "All right, I was joking. Since you're able to do this, it shows that you've already taken us as one of your own. We didn't even have the time to feel happy yet, so how could we care about a mere quasi-immortal artifact? If you want to give us something, then give each of us a treasure that's unique in this world. Can you do that?" As she finished speaking, she seemed to be unable to help but tease Xianxia again. She noticed that there were truly too few things capable of causing Xianxia to feel embarrassed and blush, and it was simply something that even the heavens wouldn't forgive her for if she didn't seize this opportunity to tease him nicely. Unique? Xianxia had taken it seriously instead, and he frowned and pondered for a long time before he nodded and said seriously, "I'm temporarily unable to think of anything that's unique in this world, but I'll surely find one for the both of you." Jinlu Qing and Qing Shui were both stunned when they heard this, as they'd both perceived the seriousness in Xianxi's voice. It seemed as if no matter how precious a unique thing in this world was, he would spare no effort to obtain it and give it to them. An indescribable flow of warmth flowed through the hearts of the two young women, and both of them kept silent as they silently savored the indescribably touched feeling they felt from what Xianxia said at this moment. This touched feeling caused them to feel at ease and happy. Actually, these words were extremely simple, yet to the two young women, it was more precious and valuable than the most moving words of romance in the world, because it was spoken by Xianxia. It was naturally impossible for Xianxia to have imagined that such an effect would actually be achieved by a few words of his. As the saying goes, the hearts of young women are difficult to understand like poems, especially when they were before the man they admired in their hearts. More often than not, a single word, gaze, or action was capable of causing them to think of countless happy scenes of the future, and it had nothing to do with anything romantic, as all they cared for was the feelings of each other. Only a month remained before the final test of the primeval battlefield arrived. No one knew the exact details of the test. The emissaries of the dark reverie that had arrived at the primeval battlefield wouldn't breathe a word to a soul as well, and they seemed as if they would absolutely not speak about it until the test started. But she found out from Madman Lu that it wasn't just these emissaries that would be arriving from the dark reverie, and there would more emissaries coming in succession during this month. Moreover, the person that possessed the power to make decisions about the final test was a heavenly immortal called Bing Shirtion. Exactly, this was a true heavenly immortal that was absolutely a supreme existence in the mortal dimension. How seriously the various powers of the dark reverie took the final test of the primeval battlefield was obvious from this. Since he started cultivating until now, Xianxia had only seen a strand of a heavenly immortal's will, and it was from the heavenly immortal jade talisman that the Shang clan had activated. But even then, that sort of might that belonged to a heavenly immortal had shaken him to the point he was almost unable to arouse the intention to resist it. If it wasn't for the mysterious tiny cauldron that hung before his chest, he would have probably been annihilated by the will of that heavenly immortal long ago. Presently, when he heard a real heavenly immortal was about to descend to Primeval City and preside over the final test, a strand of excitement and anticipation couldn't help but arise in Xianxi's heart. What are heavenly immortals like? Xianxi's mind was filled with thoughts. During these past few years, he'd experienced countless arduous battles and made the best use of every single minute to cultivate painstakingly, all for the sake of becoming a heavenly immortal. This was an obsession in his heart that had never been shaken. The reason was extremely simple. Only by becoming a heavenly immortal would he have the chance to search for the whereabouts of his mother, Zuoqiu Shui. "Kid, are you very interested towards heavenly immortals?" The nearby madman Lu grinned as he spoke, and coupled with his extremely slovenly and gaunt appearance, he seemed to be extremely wretched in appearance. Xianxia instantly returned to his senses, and he nodded as he said, "I do indeed want to know exactly how formidable the strength of a heavenly immortal is. I advise you to not get happy too soon." Madman Lu stroked his goatee while he chuckled. "Now that I speak of it, Bing Shirtian can still be considered to be a love rival of yours. Love rival? She was astounded, and he felt it was absurd. I'm only a rebirth realm expert, whereas he's a heavenly immortal. How could he possibly be a love rival of mine? Not to mention I don't even know this Bing Shirtian. Alas, why don't you understand yet? Bing Shirtian ascended to become a heavenly immortal from the Heaven Flow Dao sect. When he was still a cultivator, he was the junior brother of Qing Shui and had always pursued Qing Shui crazily. I wonder if he still has this girl in his mind after so many years have passed. Madman Lu gulped down a mouthful of wine and smacked his lips before he sighed. All those years ago, both of them were the most outstanding figures of the Heaven Flow Dao sect. Their reputations shook the entire dark reverie, and they were just like any pair of proud geniuses. Unfortunately, at the final instant when they were about to become immortals, Qing Shui chose rebirth and to cultivate once more, whereas Bing Shirtian chose to ascend and become a heavenly immortal instead. She was instantly stunned. So it turns out that Qing Shui was actually so famous in her previous lifetime. Moreover, the heavenly immortal realm expert, Bing Shirtian, that's about to arrive at Primeval City was a junior brother of Qing Shui's all those years ago. She finally understood what exactly was going on when Madman Lu spoke about Bing Shirtian being his love rival. It was truly rather absurd. The junior brother of Qing Shui's previous lifetime was actually a heavenly immortal, and he'd once pursued her crazily, whereas in this lifetime, Qing Shui had become his woman instead and had even given birth to a child for him. Now Bing Shirtian was about to arrive at Primeval City and would surely meet Qing Shui. Exactly what sort of havoc would arise when they reunite once again? Will Bing Shirtian still have Qing Shui in his mind? What about Qing Shui? What sort of position does Bing Shirtian occupy in her heart? When he thought up to here, a complicated feeling arose in Xianxia's heart. As a normal man, he naturally didn't hope that would have any connection with another man. Kid, wipe that bitter expression of your face. If you don't want your woman to be seized by another, then wouldn't it be settled if you work hard and defeat all your rivals? Madman Lu chucked as he said, I can take the responsibility to tell you that Qing Shui was extremely proud in her previous life, and there wasn't a single man that could enter her eyes, including Bing Shirtian. Oh, Xi's spirits were refreshed. Qing Shui actually looked down upon Bing Shirtian? She was really proud enough. Actually, even I'm unable to wrap my head around why such a proud person like Qing Shui would take a fancy to a stupid kid like you, and you actually got her without making a single sound. Simply like romance that descended from the heavens. If it were to be spread to the dark reverie, it would absolutely cause an uproar. Madman Lu praised endlessly. She rubbed his nose as he recalled the bumpy relationship he had with Qing Shui, and he felt that it was indeed a slight accident. Could even be said that he had to thank Shang Kuan. Without Shang Kuan doing such a hateful thing, how could he have possibly caused such a great commotion and made Qing Shui change her attitude towards him? In short, all of this seemed as if it had been predestined by a higher power long ago. There was resentment, hostility, and collision, and it was complicated and breathtaking. Yet when he thought about it now, all of it had transformed into a beautiful memory instead. But you have to be careful. This love rival of yours isn't so easy to deal with. You're utterly not a match for him now, and you have to take precautions against him feeling hatred towards you because of his love for her and intending to harm you. Madman Lu's expression became solemn as he warned seriously. Obviously, facing this heavenly immortal Bing Shirtian had similarly brought great pressure to him. Shi nodded and then he frowned. But as a heavenly immortal and with his status, he ought to not do something that's beneath his dignity, right? That's hard to say. Was anyone capable of seeing through love since ancient times? Madman Lu shook his head and sighed. In conclusion, it's best that you be careful. At that time, if a conflict really does occur, I'll naturally not sit idly by and remain indifferent. Never had Shi imagined that Madman Lu would actually speak such resolute words. After all, Bing Shirtian was a heavenly immortal that had already stood proudly at the highest peak in the mortal dimension and was a supreme existence. If it was any other earthly immortal realm expert, then not to mention going against a heavenly immortal, they would probably not even dare have the thought. However, Madman Lu had spoken like this instead. His words seemed to be spoken casually, yet his intention to protect Xianxia within these words were so firm and resolute, causing Xianxia to be unable to help but be moved. Xianxia took a deep breath as he said seriously, "Thank you, Senior." Madman Lu was from the Dark Reverie's 9 Radiant Sword sect, and possessed a strength that even the 8th level earthly immortal realm Yunlanqing was extremely afraid of. Even though he'd come to Primeval City this time because Bai Wanqing asked him to, yet with his status, he actually had utterly no need to do this, and he was completely able to think of various ways to refuse. It was even to the extent that there was utterly no need for him to speak with a junior like Xianxia. But he'd still spoken like this, so how could such actions not cause Xianxia to be moved? How many times have I said it? Don't call me Senior. Madman Lu rolled his eyes before returning to his obstinate and disagreeable appearance. Xianxia smiled, as he'd noticed this old fellow looked to be extremely slovenly and eccentric. Yet actually, he was a person that was full of hot blood and acted according to the feelings in his heart. Xianxia returned to his residence. It was a courtyard that occupied a vast area, a single house which had its own courtyard and entrance, with a small bridge over a flowing stream, artificial mountains and fountains, and there was even a luxuriant garden. But this courtyard had been left completely unattended for countless years, causing it to be overgrown with weeds and moss, and it was suffused with an ancient aura and seemed desolate and quiet. Courtyards like this could be seen all over Primeval City, and it wasn't rare. Yet now, it was utterly impossible if each and every person wanted to occupy a courtyard like this for themselves. Along with the approach of the final test of the Primeval battlefield, there were more and more dynasties that had arrived safely in Primeval City, causing the number of people to rise explosively, so it naturally became difficult to find a residence in the city. It was even to the extent that numerous bloody incidents had erupted for the sake of seizing a residence. Fortunately, Xianxia and the others had taken control of this northeast area long ago, and every single one of them had a courtyard for them to cultivate in, so they didn't have to worry about this. Moreover, with the presence of the 2 great earthly immortal realm experts, Yunlanqing and Madman Lu, there wasn't any ignorant fool that dared cause trouble in the northeast area. Xianxia sat cross-legged within his room. His mind that had been strained since entering the primeval battlefield was finally able to relax, and he felt a feeling of relief that he hadn't felt in a long time. But he didn't dare slack off. A month of time passed by in the blink of an eye to cultivators, and it was even to the extent it could pass during a single period of meditating and cultivating. Xianxia naturally wouldn't seek to break through in his cultivation at a time like this, and he started sorting and counting his gains before refining the talisman armament once more. Swish! A large pile of treasures that were flowing with multicolored lights appeared in the room, and they caused the room to be illuminated in a riot of colors. Amongst these treasures were spirit materials, spirit herbs, and a variety of rare materials. All of their qualities were exceedingly extraordinary, and they were covered in strands of strings of Tao markings, causing them to be Tao-grade treasures. If they were placed in the outside world, they were sufficiently rare to be called treasures that could only be chanced upon by luck and not sought after. For example, the lightning orchid chun she obtained upon arriving at the primeval battlefield had Tao markings on 6 of its 12 petals already. If all of its petals were able to develop Tao markings, then he would be entirely capable of using it as a main material to refine a Tao Insight Origin pill that contained the Grand Tao of Lightning. All in all, within this large pile of treasures, every single one of them was exceedingly extraordinary and precious, and their value was immeasurable. He'd found some of these treasures from the primitive sea and some were plundered from the corpses of his enemies, and they were a superb collection of a variety of materials that were utterly capable of advancing the quality of the talisman armament by a level. Of course, a large portion of these treasures were origin pearls. These treasures that were similar to the golden cores of cultivators were obtained by him from hunting the sea demons in the primitive sea, and he possessed an entire few tens of thousands of them. Not only did these origin pearls contain the essence of a sea demon's cultivation, they also contained strands of Tao insights, causing their value to be shocking to the extreme. If used to refine medicinal pills, their effect would even surpass the Sky Jade liquid pill, and they could already be called heaven-rank spirit pills. After using half a day of time, she had sorted out this entire pile of treasures. Those utilized to refine the talisman armament were grouped together. Those utilized to refine medicinal pills were grouped together. He temporarily had no use for some rare spirit herbs and spirit materials, so he planted them in the forest in the second level of the Buddha's pagodas, the 4 symbols later. He'd already created a herb garden there, and it was filled with dense second-wood qi, causing it to be extremely suitable for the growth of spirit herbs. In the end, only a pile of origin pearls from the sea demons remained before Xianxia. All the medicinal pills in his possession had long since been completely consumed during the numerous horrifying battles, and he urgently needed to replenish them. Otherwise, once another battle erupted, then with his cultivation, he wouldn't be able to persist for a long time before his true essence was consumed and dried up, so he wanted to utilize these origin pearls to refine a batch of medicinal pills. Unfortunately, he didn't have any precious medicinal formulas in his possession, so all he could do was merely refine the killing intent and impurities within these origin pearls, and it was sufficient so long as he was able to consume them to replenish his true essence. This was something he could do nothing about. The primeval battlefield wasn't like any other place and didn't have any shops that sold medicinal pills. Unless one had mastered an extremely skilled pill refinement technique, otherwise one could only make do like this. The talisman armament soared through the sky while a crimson-red furnace suddenly flew out from its surface. The furnace was completely coiled with the glow of fire and surging with talisman markings, and it emitted a monstrous aura that seemed capable of smelting everything in the world. The furnace was called the Voidblaze Furnace and was completely formed from a few thousand types of fire talisman markings. It was from within the Crimson Fire Divine Talisman and wasn't a real furnace, yet its effect was much better than a real furnace, and when used to smelt various materials, it was capable of producing an unimaginable and miraculous effect. This was the miraculous effect of divine talismans. There were 5 divine talismans inscribed within the talisman armament. Every single one was like an inexhaustible treasure vault, and they possessed extremely numerous usages that covered a vast expanse of things. The furnace soared into the sky while the glow of flames flowed about, and talisman markings were like rays of light that suffused the room with blazing brilliance. Xianxia flicked his finger and numerous origin pearls flew up before slowly flowing into the Voidblaze Furnace, and the strands and strings of killing intent and impurities within them were melted bit by bit, causing them to become crystalline and translucent. 3 days later, a dense and refreshing fragrance spread out and suffused the entire room, and the pure and thick spirit energy was even capable of causing an ordinary person to become immune to poison and have his lifespan increased from just smelling it. As he smelled this refreshing fragrance that entered his nose, the corners of Xianxia's mouth couldn't help but be suffused with a trace of a smile, and then he stretched out his hand to form a seal, causing the Voidblaze Furnace to emit a droning sound before suddenly ceasing to move. After that, a stream that was like a river of stars flew out of the furnace. If one looked carefully, then one would notice that the stream was shockingly made of numerous origin pearls that were crystalline, translucent, and glowing, and they seemed to be emitting a rhythm that was like the beat of a heart as if they were alive. With a flick of his sleeve, Xianxia put away all these origin pearls that were no different to spirit pills within the Buddha's pagoda. A rough count actually put all of them at over 40,000, and they were sufficient to last until the final test ended. Next, it should be the time to refine the talisman armament. So long as its quality is increased once more, would its might be stronger than a quasi-immortal artifact. Xianxia stretched himself while his clear gaze was filled with anticipation. Half a month later, faint sword howls undulated out within the room. The space between Xianxia's brows carried dense exhaustion that couldn't be concealed. His expression was pale, his eyes filled with strings of blood, and his clean chin was covered in dense stubble, causing him to look extremely haggard. He appeared as if he'd overused his physical strength. In reality, he was indeed really exhausted. Refining the talisman armament for half a month without sleep nor rest was something that even he was unable to endure with his physical strength. Moreover, for the sake of guaranteeing that the talisman armament would be refined successfully, his mind had always been focused on the talisman armament without slacking in the slightest, and he was completely like a drawn bow, causing the exhaustion he felt to be something that was utterly indescribable unless one experiences by oneself. But when he thought of the fruits of his refinement, Even if he was exhausted to the limit, he still couldn't help but feel a strand of excitement. With a raise of his eyes, Xianxia carefully sized up this companion of his that had followed by his side for many years. The sword was 1 m long, its body slender, strong, and pitch black like an expanse of limpid water in autumn, and it was simple and unsophisticated in appearance. The fuller of the sword was heavy and protruding, whereas the blade of the sword itself was sharp and thin like a cicada's wings and was suffused with a sharp shine that was dazzling and bright as snow. The entire sword emanated the feeling of returning to simplicity. However, when one looked carefully at it, one would be able to feel a vast aura that caused one's heart to palpitate. The sharpness of metal, the vitality of wood, the grace of water, the rage of flame, and the heaviness of earth, all of it was fused into one to form a circulation of the 5 elements that was flawless and perfect. It felt as if one was amongst the myriad of stars in the Milky Way, while a mysterious energy that was profound to the point it caused one's heart to palpitate circulated endlessly within it. Xianxia felt an icy cold prickling pain on the tip of his finger as he stroked the sword lightly, and it caused him to exclaim with admiration in his heart. After all, his body refinement cultivation had already attained the rebirth realm now, and an ordinary heaven-rank magic treasure was utterly incapable of breaking through his body. However, the talisman armament that was refined once again had only relied on the sword chi emitted by itself to cut into his skin to the point he felt a prickling pain, and exactly how formidable the might of the talisman armament was after being refined once more was obvious from this. Swoosh! Xianxia raised his hand and gestured, causing a top-grade heaven-rank magic treasure to float in the sky. This was a brass hammer that was 150,000 kilograms in weight, and it was extremely heavy to the point it felt like Xianxia was holding up an entire large mountain when held in his hand. There were an entire 100-plus top-grade heaven-rank magic treasures like this in Xianxia's possession, and he'd plundered all of them from his enemies in the primeval battlefield. Swoosh! A cold light suddenly appeared for a brief moment like a bolt of lightning that flashed through the air, and it slashed towards the bronze hammer. There wasn't a sound of collision, and there wasn't even the slightest spark. The sword flashed past and seemed as if it was cutting through tofu as it silently slashed the bronze hammer into 2. Even if Xianxia had made sufficient mental preparation, yet when he saw this practically bizarre scene and felt the fierce aura contained within that silence, he couldn't help but be slightly shocked in his heart. It's too formidable. Is simply the best display of the phrase cutting through iron like mud. After all, that was a top-grade heaven-rank magic treasure. However, it wasn't capable of resisting a light attack of the talisman armament and was slashed apart like paper. Such might is something that even quasi-immortal artifacts are incapable of achieving, right? When he thought up to here, Xianxia couldn't help but arouse an impulse in his heart. He wanted to compare the talisman armament with the flaming peacock fan and see exactly which weapon was stronger. But right after that, he restrained himself. After a magic treasure attained the level of a quasi-immortal artifact, its might wasn't solely decided upon by its offensive strength, and the key was the person that utilized it. Not to mention, with his current strength, he was still incapable of bringing out the entire might of the flaming peacock fan, so it was utterly meaningless to compare it with the talisman armament. But even then, Xianxia was still confident that the current might of his talisman armament was entirely on par with a quasi-immortal artifact, and as for which was stronger, it could only be measured in live combat. True essence poured into the talisman armament, causing a chilly and deep sword howl to resound out. Accompanying the chilly howl was a strand of shapeless slaughter Dao insight that stretched out, causing the table, chair, floor, window, bed, everything in the room transformed into powder amidst a bang, and then the dust scattered to the group and the air. Especially the walls and the surroundings, there were actually countless fine sword marks on them that stretched out like spider webs. Xianxia cried out in his heart as he flashed out of the room. Shit! Bang! Right when he'd just flashed out of the room, the entire room collapsed with a bang. Shockingly, the entire house made out of enormous rocks actually didn't leave behind any ruins, and it actually completely shattered into powder that scattered out before suffusing the sky with dust that shot into the sky. Xianxia hurriedly moved backward to avoid this dust. What happened? A wave of alarmed shouts resounded out in the distance as Huangfu Qingying and the others had noticed the commotion here, and all of them started questioning successively. Cough, cough. It's nothing. I accidentally destroyed the house. She felt extremely embarrassed and explained hurriedly. Everyone didn't know whether to laugh or cry from this false alarm, and they quickly dispersed. Only after they dispersed did she heave a sigh of relief and look at the culprit in his hand. And he still couldn't help but feel a shocked feeling in his heart. After being refined once more, the 5 divine talismans within the talisman armament had actually produced a portion of their effect. Earlier, when he poured his true essence into the talisman armament, he clearly saw the 5 divine talismans' images appearing on the surface of the sword, and they formed a circulation of the 5 elements that were interwoven into a vast sea of talisman markings. Moreover, within the sea of talisman markings were 10 extremely blurry figures that flashed before his eyes. It was the phantoms of the Azure Emperor, the Wood Empress, the White Emperor, the Metal Empress, the Crimson Emperor, the Fire Empress, the Black Emperor, the Water Empress, the Yellow Emperor, and the Earth Empress, and they resided within the sea of talisman markings while controlling the countless talisman markings with their monstrous might. It was precisely the terrifying strength emitted by these 10 phantoms that gushed out from the talisman armament that was constructed from the sickle of slaughter to emanate the extremely terrifying slaughter Dao insight that destroyed the house. Ha ha ha! Kid, you want to learn from me as well. In the distance, Madman Lu sat while leaning on a large tree, and he pointed at Xianxia, who was covered in dust and couldn't help but laugh loudly with ridicule. Learn from you. Xianxia glanced at the entirely dirty and extremely slovenly Madman Lu before shaking his head firmly. Even though he wasn't a clean freak, he was unable to endure making himself look worse than a beggar. But that sword in your hand is really a good treasure. If I'm not wrong, that ought to have been refined from an immortal material, right? You have to keep an eye on it and avoid it being coveted by another. Madman Lu's intoxicated eyes revealed a trace of a bright light that flashed as he warned seriously. With his cultivation, he was naturally able to discern what was special about the talisman armament, and he couldn't be bothered to warn Xianxia if it was just an ordinary quasi-immortal artifact. Xianxia nodded, and then he said with a smile, "Don't worry, Senior. Anyone who wants to seize my treasure away has to think over if they'll be able to survive." Nice resolution. I like little fellows like you the most. Madman Lu roared with laughter before lifting his yellow bottle gourd and taking gulps repeatedly with extreme delight. Only half a month remained before the final test of the primeval battlefield began. The atmosphere in Primeval City became even more nervous. Figures could rarely be seen on the streets now, as all of them they seemed to have gone into closed-door cultivation and were working hard to make preparations for the final test. Xianxia was naturally no exception. After he finished refining the talisman armament, he took a short break before starting to straighten out his other treasures without delaying in the slightest. He was looking through the jade slip that recorded the method of refining the Flame God fan. The refinement of this fan required one to gather the feathers of 7 divine flying beasts, namely the phoenix, azure phoenix, roc, peacock, nether crane, dark pheasant, and golden crow as the main materials, and they were refined into the Flame God fan along with the assistance of other spirit materials. Moreover, the flames required to refine the fan were extremely specific, and they had to be the gold blaze flame, wood soul flame, dark water flame, sun flame, and stalactite flame, which were divine flames that were scattered throughout the heavens and the earth. Once it was refined successfully, fanning it caused divine flames to blaze out with monstrous might, and it possessed the might to incinerate an ocean and transform one's enemy to ashes with a flip of the hand. It was a true weapon of immortals. According to legend, during the ancient times, there was a god that took on everyone in the heavens and the earth with the Flame God fan in his hand, and he'd incinerated countless formidable enemies, so its might was absolutely exceedingly terrifying. Boo to Xianxia, refining this treasure fan was extremely far away from him, as merely the gathering of those materials was absolutely not something his current strength was capable of accomplishing. For example, the flaming peacock fan in his hand was refined from the feather of the divine flying beast, the Nether Peacock King, and its quality had already attained the level of a quasi-immortal artifact. It was obvious how difficult it would be to gather the remaining feathers from the 6 divine flying beasts. Moreover, those flames were extremely shocking as well. They covered the 5 elements, and every single one of them was an extremely rare divine flame in the world. Supposedly, Divine flames like this already possessed their own intelligence and knew how to cultivate, so taming them would undoubtedly require an extremely formidable strength. But most importantly, the Flame God Fan was a true immortal artifact, so even though Xianxia possessed the method to refine it, he was utterly incapable of refining it by merely relying on his current cultivation. No wonder Bai Lingyun handed this jade slip over so readily. She probably felt there was an extremely slim hope of being able to refine this treasured fan as well, right? Xianxia shook his head as he placed the jade slip into the Buddha's pagoda. Even though he was temporarily unable to refine it, along with the advancement of his cultivation and putting more effort into searching for these materials, he would one day be able to refine it. He withdrew another stone tablet that was very ordinary and covered with mottled marks, and it seemed to have experienced the baptism of countless years, causing it to emit a shocking aura that was ancient and heavy. With a brief inspection, one would be able to sense an extremely vast and powerful energy of obliteration contained within it. This energy was peerlessly pure, as if it was the place the grand Tao of obliteration was born, and it brought intense shock to anyone that sensed it. This was precisely the sacred object Xianxia had plundered from the violent waterflame apes in the primitive sea, the obliteration tablet. My comprehension towards the moves of the grand obliteration fist has already attained a state of proficiency, and just its current might is already shocking to the extreme. If I'm able to completely grasp the obliteration Tao insight, then exactly how formidable would its might be? Xianxia felt extreme anticipation. Give it to me and I'll pass down the profundities of obliteration to you. Right at this moment, a thought was suddenly transmitted out from the tiny cauldron that hung before his chest, and it shocked Xianxia, who was in contemplation to the point of being struck with panic. This mysterious tiny cauldron has actually come to life. Xianxia took a deep breath and asked probingly, "Is this stone tablet extremely important to you? It's almost capable of restoring 1,000th of my injuries. It isn't too important, yet better than nothing." The tiny cauldron really did speak again, and it spoke words that caused Xianxia to be even more shocked in his heart. The tiny cauldron is so formidable, yet it has actually suffered a heavy injury? Then who was it that defeated the tiny cauldron? The tiny cauldron's origins were extremely mysterious. When he noticed the tiny cauldron for the first time, it was on the Isle of Fallen Treasures. At that time, the tiny cauldron's entire body emitted a milky white brilliance that was blazing and resplendent to the extreme, causing Xianxia to think it was a magic treasure in the form of a jade ornament. Only later on at the bottom of the River of Bones did Xianxia notice that true appearance of the tiny cauldron. Moreover, he noticed to his shock that the tiny cauldron had utilized the white-bone divine flame to refine itself, and had even completely absorbed the divinity and grand Tao markings on the skeleton of a god. Such a phenomenon caused Xianxia to be even surer that the tiny cauldron's origins were extraordinary. Moreover, the series of events that occurred later on proved that Xianxia's inference was correct. Not only had the tiny cauldron shattered the heavenly immortal's decree Pei activated, it had even devoured the will of the heavenly immortal that the Shang clan activated, causing it to have saved Xianxia's life on 2 occasions. How could an ordinary treasure possess such miraculous and extraordinary might? Now, the tiny cauldron that had always seemed to be mysterious had actually spoken. Moreover, it directly and openly said that it had suffered a heavy injury. So how could Xianxia not be shocked by this? The tiny cauldron is formidable, even when suffering from a heavy injury. Who would be capable of defeating it? Besides that, exactly how formidable would it be if it's at its prime? There's no need to rack your brains and guess all that. The world is balanced, and you won't understand why I fell to my current state. Just like how the manner within the jade talisman in your palm will break the balance of the world as soon as it appears in the world, and it would cause numerous variables to arise. I presume you're clearly aware of those consequences. Right when Xianxia's thoughts were in chaos, the tiny cauldron suddenly spoke out. Xianxia was instantly stunned, as he never imagined that the tiny cauldron would have actually noticed the biggest secret he possessed. Moreover, it was just as the tiny cauldron had said. He really didn't dare utilize the manner within the jade pendant in his palm while within the primeval battlefield, because according to what Jiyu said, once the manner appeared, it would be noticed by the great figures amongst the emissaries of the dark reverie, and it was impossible to know if it would be fortune or calamity. But it was precisely because of this that Mu Kuei, Ling Bai, and Bai Kuei were able to be hidden within the manor and safely brought into the primeval battlefield without having to worry that they would be noticed. Yet now, the tiny cauldron had spoken like this because it was obviously worried that a great figure in the heavens and the earth would notice the manor and bring calamity to Xianxia. Is there really someone in the heavens and the earth that's capable of keeping watch on every move of all the beings in the world? Xianxia couldn't help but ask. Yes and no, the tiny cauldron replied. All in all, you just have to understand that the laws in the heavens and the earth are balanced, and so long as something that can threaten the balance appears, it would be noticed. Xianxia came to a sudden understanding, and then he felt shocked in his heart. In other words, the manor within the jade pendant in my palm is capable of threatening the balance of the heavens and the earth? Looks like I must be careful in the future. Otherwise, I'd be in deep trouble if someone covets the jade pendant. Xianxia thought in his heart. Give that stone tablet to me. I'll pass down the profundities of obliteration to you. The tiny cauldron repeated what it had said before. This time, Xianxia agreed without the slightest hesitation, and he would have done this even if the tiny cauldron didn't pass down the profundities of obliteration to him. After all, the tiny cauldron had saved his life on 2 occasions, and life-saving graces like these were absolutely not something that a stone tablet was capable of comparing to. Crack, crack. A ball of milky white brilliance wrapped around the obliteration tablet and emitted a wave of tiny cracking sounds. In next to no time, the stone tablet was completely devoured by the tiny cauldron and vanished completely, whereas the tiny cauldron seemed to be even more crystalline and translucent, and it was suffused with a hazy sheen of divinity that was gorgeous to the extreme. Tao insight is incorporeal and shapeless, and the wonders of its utilization depends on one's own wits. The insight of obliteration originates from the laws of annihilation. This might is formidable and it's extremely rare. Calm your mind and comprehend it, it ought to not be difficult. Next, the tiny cauldron really passed down the profundities of obliteration directly to Xianxia. In the next moment, Xianxia felt his mind drone. Instantly, he seemed to be swimming freely through the boundless universe and Milky Way, and he saw the rise, fall, and alternating between the myriad of worlds. He saw stars colliding and being obliterated with a bang in the universe. He saw planes charging into each other, and 2 overlapping worlds were obliterated into nothingness. He saw all the beings in the world vanishing amidst extreme collision amongst each other, and they transformed into nothingness and disappeared forever. Numerous scenes related to obliteration played out within his mind, and all the scenes seemed to have been slowed down by countless times, causing everything down to the slightest detail to appear in his heart. Various comprehensions and experiences related to obliteration caused Xianxia to suddenly become enlightened, and he fell into a tranquil and happy state of comprehension. Suddenly, Xianxia's figure flashed, and he'd unconsciously started practicing the grand obliteration fist. Crush, crush. His figure stretched out as layer upon layer of fist images overlapped with each other. Even though he hadn't utilized his true essence, when Xianxia's fist flashed through space, it seemed like a whale that had disturbed the ocean, causing space to be obliterated inch by inch, and the air in the surroundings collapsed and exploded apart while emitting crushing sounds from being crushed into powder and obliterated. When looked at from afar, Xianxia's entire body seemed to be swimming amidst shattered space. Everywhere the force of his fist passed, space would be obliterated and reborn, and it seemed like a cycle of life, death, and rebirth, causing the scene to be extremely bizarre. It was common knowledge that most of the boundless Tao insights in the heavens and the earth came in pair of 2 extremes that repulsed each other and couldn't coexist. For example, water and fire, yin and yang, sky and earth, and so on and so forth. The grand obliteration fist utilized this force of repulsion from 2 extremes to erupt with an extremely terrifying might, and this energy was obliteration. In other words, obliteration was the perfect grasp of 2 completely different and opposite energies, and with every move, the energies would collide and become chaotic, causing them to erupt with extremely unbelievable might. Moreover, obliteration Tao insight was similar to the Tao insights of the sword, blade, and devour. All of them were methods of utilizing energy, and without the obliteration Dao insight, the grand obliteration fist would still be incomplete no matter how formidable it was. Xianxia was immersed in his comprehension. His figure was like a dragon that swam about while his fists whistled through the air, and even though he hadn't utilized his true essence, merely the Dao insight contained in the movements of his fist had actually caused everything in an area of 3 kilometers to become chaotic. Waves that roiled violently appeared in space before it was obliterated layer by layer. The enormous rocks, weeds, and ancient trees had all been shattered into powder and dissipated along with the wind. Rumble. Along with the passage of time, the movements of his fist became more and more skillful while its might grew more and more terrifying, causing everything in his surroundings to be in a state of great chaos. The airflow was chaotic, order was shattered, and everything was in upheaval and unease. It seemed as if everything would crumble into obliteration and nothingness in the next moment. The energy of obliteration. In the distance, Madman Lu looked at the fist technique Xianxia executed from afar, and his muddy eyes abruptly erupted with a ball of bright lights. Within his gaze was surprise, admiration, and shock, and he seemed to have never imagined that Xianxia would actually had comprehended and grasped a grand Tao profundity that possessed such extraordinary might. This time has actually arrived. But after that, he seemed to have noticed something, causing his gaze to instantly move from Xianxia and look towards the extremely distant sky, and his gaze was like bolts of lightning that seemed to have seen through all the secrets in the heavens and the earth. At this moment, all the emissaries in Primeval City seemed to have noticed something, and they stopped what they were doing before swiftly looking towards the extremely distant sky. Suddenly, countless flower petals had actually swirled down from the sky, causing an exotic fragrance to assault the noses of all as they fluttered down from all over the sky. They seemed to be cheering and filled with joy while the chanting of monks surged throughout the surroundings along with the descent of the petals, and it caused one to feel as if their minds and bodies were cleaned and their spirits refreshed. After that, a wisp of golden light surged out before transforming into the form of man. He was like an extremely blazing sun that was bathed completely in golden light while a myriad of strands of auspicious chi coiled around him, and he illuminated the entire world to the point everything in the world was cast into a shadow. Moreover, the aura that flowed out from his body was even deep like an ocean or deep pool, and it seemed as if his body contained a mysterious universe, causing him to emanate a supreme imposing aura that seemed to embrace everything in the world. It seemed as if everything in this world was already grasped within his hand, and he possessed a supremely formidable strength that was all-powerful and capable of ruling over the world and everything within it. In an instant, everyone in Primeval City felt their souls tremble, and it felt as if so long as this figure was willing, a breath of the figure was capable of blowing them into ashes. This figure was terrifying to the extreme, but phenomena like this only appeared for an instant, and when everyone returned to their senses, the flower petals that swirled down from the sky, the exotic fragrance that assaulted the nose, the waves of chanting, and the figure that was like a god. Everything had vanished, causing all the people in their dazed states to think that everything they saw was their own hallucination. But everyone knew that it wasn't their hallucination, but that a true heavenly immortal had descended. When they thought up to here, everyone couldn't help but feel excited in their hearts. A heavenly immortal. Amongst the myriad of beings in the world, how many are capable of witnessing the graceful bearing of a heavenly immortal with their own 2 eyes? But even though they were excited, no one dared make a clamor because they seemed to be deeply afraid of disturbing the heavenly immortal and causing themselves to be doomed eternally. Xianxia suddenly jolted awake from the profound state of comprehension, and he looked around at the surroundings with a bewildered expression as he muttered, "What happened earlier? Why did I have a terrified and oppressed feeling? A heavenly immortal descended." The tiny cauldron suddenly spoke out. "Heavenly immortal?" Xianxia's eyes squinted as he said with shock, "It wouldn't be that Bing Shirtian, right? Your mind is slightly agitated. Could it be that it's related to that heavenly immortal?" The tiny cauldron said, "Actually, you don't have to be nervous. It's only the external avatar of a heavenly immortal. Since it has descended to this primeval battlefield, its strength will be suppressed by the laws of the heavens and the earth, causing it to be unable to bring forth the true strength of a heavenly immortal. Then, exactly how strong is he? Chun she couldn't help but ask. Slightly stronger than a 9th-level earthly immortal realm expert. The tiny cauldron went silent for a long time before answering. Chun she couldn't help but laugh bitterly. A 9th-level earthly immortal realm expert can already overcome the heavenly tribulation to ascend into a heavenly immortal, and he's even slightly stronger than that. Wouldn't that mean that he's already standing at the highest position in this world? But Chun she understood something from what the tiny cauldron said. The true body of Bing Shirtion hadn't arrived here, and what had descended here was merely an external avatar of his. However, even then, the strength possessed by his external avatar was already sufficiently astonishing, and it was absolutely not something he was currently capable of going against. When he thought up to here, Chun she couldn't help but sigh lightly. I can help you if you feel it's difficult to handle, but I only have 30% confidence in being able to annihilate the external avatar of a heavenly immortal. Do you want to give it a try? The tiny cauldron spoke out abruptly, and it spoke words that were unbelievable in Xianxia's opinion. The arrival of a heavenly immortal shook the entire city, and it also indicated that the final test in the primeval battlefield was about to draw its curtains. The rebirth realm experts of the various dynasties felt both nervousness and anticipation, and they cultivated even more painstakingly to the point they practically didn't leave their residences and made the best use of every single minute of time to cultivate. This also caused the streets in Primeval City to seem even more desolate and deserted. But there were still cultivators in groups of 2 or 3 that were standing before the Martial Emperor's Warsoul tablet at the center of the city. They'd just arrived at Primeval City, and they were measuring their strengths. First place is actually Chan Shi? Isn't this fellow from the Darchu dynasty? How could he have possibly attained such accomplishments? Yeah, in the past, the first place had always been occupied by the top dynasties and prestigious clans. How could it have fallen to a disciple of an ordinary dynasty? It's strange indeed. Did all of you see the top 20? There are actually 5 from the Darchu dynasty. Isn't it too heaven-defying for an ordinary dynasty to possess such karmic luck? These cultivators that had just entered the city felt extremely surprised and expressed their wonder as they gazed at the numerous names of the disciples from the Darchu dynasty on the Warsoul tablet. Darchu dynasty. In the distance, a tall figure arrived trippingly. He wore feathered clothes with a star-shaped crown on his head. His eyes were suffused with numerous circles of light, and he seemed illusory, mysterious, and brimming with immortal energy. Accompanying his arrival were strands of refreshing fragrance that smelt like nectar, and it refreshed the mind and soul, causing one's spirits to be refreshed. Moreover, this expansive space seemed to have become quiet, as every single corner of it revealed a feeling of tranquility, peacefulness, and order. As they sensed these changes, the nearby people looked behind them with surprise. However, they were disappointed instead because no great figure had appeared within their fields of vision. Even if one said there was instead someone behind, then it was only a handsome young man in feathered clothes and a star-shaped crown that was walking towards them. He seemed like a gifted scholar from a poor family in the mortal world, and his cultivation didn't seem to be formidable. Moreover, he walked over slowly and didn't reveal any powerful imposing aura, causing him to seem ordinary and common. People like this could be seen all over Primeval City, and it was too commonly seen. But what's going on with the change in the nearby space and the strands of refreshing fragrance that refreshes the mind and soul? Everyone couldn't wrap their head around this, and then they shook their heads successively and thought no more about it. After that, they shot their gazes towards the Warsoul tablet once again and looked at Xianxia's name as they discussed animatedly. This handsome young man smiled lightly and stood in the crowd before raising his eyes to glance over. Heh, brothers, all of you have just arrived, right? Everyone in Primeval City knows Xianxia's reputation now. Right at this moment, an expert chuckled. What do you mean by this? The handsome young man turned around and asked with interest. Tisk, you're obviously from an ordinary dynasty. You're ill-informed to the point you haven't even heard about the huge incidents that occurred in Primeval City lately. The expert laughed endlessly with ridicule. The handsome young man that was ridiculed didn't care in the slightest, and he continued to grin as he asked, Oh, Then can you guide me, fellow Taoist? Never mind. There's no harm in telling you. The expert felt greatly disappointed when he saw the handsome young man wasn't enraged, and he pursed his lips before he said, "Half a month ago, Xianxia had just arrived at Primeval City." This person was obviously a talkative person, and he spoke of all the various things Xianxia had done since entire Primeval City. When he spoke about something that was exciting, he beamed with joy as his spittle scattered all over, and he seemed as if he was a relative of Xianxia's that felt excited and honored by Xianxia's deeds. Annihilated numerous experts of first-rate dynasties, crushed the Shang clan by himself, and even defeated a strand of the will of a heavenly immortal. The smile on the handsome young man's face was gradually restrained, and his gaze became profound as his expression turned serious. After a short while, he exploded into laughter. "Interesting, truly interesting. I never imagined that I would actually encounter such a formidable young man when I came here this time." The expert was very dissatisfied by the handsome young man's reaction. He originally thought that the handsome young man would be filled with excitement and reveal a respectful and feverish expression as he had when he'd first heard about Xianxia's deeds. How could he have imagined that this fellow would have such a reaction? He couldn't help but ridicule. "Little brother, your tone sounds as if you're an elder, and it's slightly unpleasant to the ear. If you're not convinced, then go ahead and measure yourself. See if you're able to push Xianxia's name down." The handsome young man smiled with a disapproving expression. "As expected, you're only pleasant to the eye but useless to the point of only knowing how to use your mouth. Alas, the young people these days are slightly too arrogant." The expert was even surer that this handsome young man was putting on airs when he saw this, and he spoke bluntly with sarcasm. The handsome young man seemed as if he had nothing to do with all of this instead, and he completely disregarded the fellow babbling by his side as his gaze swept towards the Warsoul tablet before a wisp of an extremely gorgeous light erupted abruptly from his eyes. Swoosh! In the next moment, he'd already torn through the sky to arrive before the 3 kilometers tall Warsoul tablet, and then he stretched out his hand to rub one of the names on the tablet that was coiled by a golden light. His movements were gentle and slow, and it was even slightly trembling just like his current feelings, whereas memories that were like an explosive stream gushed throughout his body and caused him to seem to have returned to the days of his youth. In that period of time, she was the only speck of light. Up until now, this light had never faded. How audacious! Is the Warsoul tablet something you can touch? He's really courting death. Countless people have tried to touch the Warsoul tablet in the innumerable years of the past, yet has anyone ever succeeded? Quickly get down here. Don't disrespect the divine tablet. When they saw the handsome young man soar into the sky and stretch out his hand to touch the Warsoul tablet, the expressions of everyone present at the scene went grim as they shouted out loudly. Bang! A piercingly cold light shot out explosively from the eyes of the handsome young man as he looked down at the people below him. At this instant, the heavens and the earth seemed to have fallen into pitch-black night, and the entire world was cast into a shade. A matchless pressure that felt like the sky was crumbling down pressed down fiercely, and it pressured down onto everyone present to the point that they fell to their knees with a thump while blood flowed from all the orifices on their faces, and they were unable to speak another word. With a single glance, he'd suppressed everyone present here. Everyone present here possessed a cultivation at the rebirth realm, yet now, they seemed as if they were confined prisoners, and not to mention struggling, even breathing felt difficult for them. This sort of feeling from being pressed down to the point of kneeling on the ground caused them to be overwhelmed with embarrassment and indignation. Who were they? They were promising top geniuses from the various dynasties, and their ability to safely enter Primeval City was already sufficient to display the formidableness of their strengths. When had they been fiercely humiliated in this way by another? However, when they saw the eyes of that handsome young man, they were unable to restrain a type of indescribable terror from gushing into their hearts, and the anger and embarrassment within their eyes instantly vanished to be replaced by deep despair and helplessness. Who exactly is this handsome young man? Could he be an emissary of the dark reverie? They were unable to guess who the young man was no matter how they racked their brains, but they knew that they'd probably gotten themselves into enormous trouble this time. The handsome young man turned around in midair, and his gaze looked once more towards the name coiled in golden light, and the icy coldness in his eyes instantly transformed into a gentle expression. This time, he didn't touch that name with his finger again, and he seemed to be deeply afraid that his actions would disrespect the person the name represented. He just looked at it silently with a smile on the corners of his mouth. "Senior sister, I surely won't let you leave me this time." After an unknown period of time, a mutter escaped the handsome young man's lips that were thin like blades, and the expression in his gaze was already replaced by a sheen of burning resolution. "Lord Immortal, so it turns out that you were here. We require you to preside over the final test of the primeval battlefield." Right at this moment, a wave of voices sounded out from afar, and then over 10 figures that were dazzling like suns arrived from all over, and their imposing manners were vast to the point of covering the heavens and the earth. This scene shocked everyone that knelt on the ground to the point of being flabbergasted, and they felt their scalps go numb. My God! Why have all the emissaries of the dark reverie come over? However, what caused them to be even more astonished was these emissaries actually stood respectfully and reverently at the side as they looked up towards the handsome young man in midair with gazes that fully revealed expressions of awe. The immortal emissary Bing-Shirtian? A thought flashed past the minds of everyone like a bolt of lightning, and it caused them to instantly seem as if they'd been struck by lightning. As they recalled that they'd actually been greatly disrespectful towards a heavenly immortal, all of them even felt like ending their own lives. Especially that person that had once ridiculed and mocked Bing-Shirtian. He even wished for nothing more than to slap himself countless times and was utterly regretful when he saw this scene. "All of you have come." Meanwhile, the expression of the handsome young man returned to normal, and he walked down from midair. Compared to those earthly immortal realm experts that were like numerous suns that emitted divine radiances, Bing-Shirtian seemed to be extremely ordinary, but it was precisely this that caused him to seem even more extraordinary. He had the bearing of one that had seen through the grand chaos of the heavens and the earth and had returned to simplicity. "Greetings, Lord Immortal." The 10+ emissaries withdrew their auras, and they seemed like mice that had encountered a cat as they bowed respectfully. If the others were to see this scene, they would surely have their jaws shocked off. After all these emissaries were earthly immortal realm experts from the various powers of the dark reverie, and they possessed extremely respected statuses. However, now, all of them had bowed in unison towards the handsome young man, and their movements were natural and without any feelings of embarrassment. How could this not be shocking? But this was extremely normal. After all, a heavenly immortal was a true immortal, whereas even though the earthly immortal realm contained the word immortal, their strengths had only arrived at the peak of the mortal dimension, yet they weren't considered immortals of the immortal dimension. Only heavenly immortals belonged to the immortal dimension and belonged to the heavens. The difference between the two of them was like the difference between the heavens and the earth, and they were entirely not figures of the same level. I have to trouble everyone to act in unison 15 days from now to assume command in Primeval City and start the final test. Bing-Shirtian stood majestically as his starry eyes swept everyone lightly, and he instantly knew why these people had came before directly waving his hand. The test this time isn't like normal. It won't be a selection that's held level by level. So long as they're able to survive the sudden event that occurs in the primeval battlefield, then all of them can obtain the qualifications to enter the dark reverie. I presume all of you clearly know the reason behind this, and I won't speak any unnecessary words. All of the emissaries chimed in with agreement when they heard this. "Junior brother Yoon, let's go." Bing-Shirtian's gaze swept out and descended onto the snow-white-haired Yoon Lanxing, and he carried a smile on the corners of his lips as he spoke with an indifferent tone that revealed a trace of anticipation. This place was a hall that was extremely common in Primeval City, its eaves mottled and dilapidated, and it was suffused with an ancient aura. However, it was a different scene within the hall. An incense stick burner in the shape of an auspicious beast emitted strands of smoke and fragrance that drifted out into the air. The floor was covered in a scarlet red and luxurious carpet. Tear-shaped lanterns hung on its walls and emitted gentle beams of light that caused one's heart to feel refreshed and gladdened. At the center of the hall was a table constructed from dark green and mottled jade. Bing-Shirtian sat before the table with eyes that were like the night sky, deep and illusory, and the space between his brows was covered with an expression of peace and tranquility. On the table was a go board. Bing-Shirtian held a transparent jade glass and drank the wine within it in sips, while making strategic moves with the black and white go pieces. And he had a carefree bearing of enjoyment. After they left the Warsaw tablet, Yun Lanxing had brought him over here and not the northeast area where Qing Shui resided. Even though he felt that this was strange, but Bing-Shirtian didn't question it. I've already waited for so many years, so what if I wait another while longer? Conversely, he enjoyed this process very much. He felt anticipation, excitement, and nervousness, causing his mind that had been tempered to the point of being extremely composed to be unable to help but ripple slightly. If he were on the battlefield, this trace of ripple might cause a calamity to befall him. But it was different now. This was the primeval battlefield, and there wasn't anything that could threaten him. So he safely enjoyed the various feelings this trace of ripple gave him, and he felt happy and pleased. He felt as if he'd returned all those years ago in his youth, and all his thoughts would only change for that person. Pat, pat, pat. The clear and crisp sound of go pieces descending resounded out on the board, and it conformed to Bing-Shirtian's current feelings. Even though his thoughts weren't calm, he acted without the slightest regret, just like his placement of go pieces. The nearby Yun Lanxing sighed in his heart when he saw this scene, and his mouth gaped yet was closed by him a moment later as he didn't know how to explain it to Bing-Shirtian. Actually, he'd hesitated to speak numerous times since they'd entered this hall, and he seemed as if he wanted to speak, yet was unable to, as if there was something difficult to disclose, and as if he was afraid of destroying this rare, peaceful atmosphere. Junior brother Yun, how about you play around with me? Bing-Shirtian suddenly raised his head and asked with a smile on his face. Yun Lanxing shook his head because he didn't have the mood to play Go right now. Bing-Shirtian smiled while his slender and white fingers casually played with a black and white Go piece, and his voice had already become serious as he sighed. Go ahead. Exactly what it is that has caused you to actually be in such a difficult situation? Yun Lanxing puckered his lips, and he struggled for a long time in his heart before being unable to endure it any longer and said, Senior brother Bing, this matter is too significant. I'm worried. There's nothing to worry about. Bing-Shirtian shook his head lightly and said, Let me guess. Could it be related to senior sister Qing? Yun Lanxing was stunned. He sized up the handsome young man before him and noticed the young man's smile was gentle, his expression peaceful and tranquil, and he seemed as if he wouldn't frown even if the sky collapsed. This caused him to heave a sigh of relief in his head. Right, senior brother Bing is already a heavenly immortal, so how could some matters of love affect his state of mind? When he thought up to here, he didn't hesitate any longer and sighed. You're right, senior brother Bing. This matter is indeed related to senior sister Qing. In her current lifetime, she already has a person in her heart. As he spoke, he'd always been paying attention to Bing-Shirtian's reaction, and he didn't see any trace of anger in Bing-Shirtian's expression, causing him to feel even more relieved. I never imagined that such a proud person like senior sister Qing would actually have someone she loves now. Bing-Shirtian laughed lightly as an imperceptible trace of self-ridicule gushed out on the corners of his mouth. All those years ago, countless exceptional and outstanding geniuses in the dark reverie fell for her peerless beauty, yet none were able to move her heart. However, there's someone that has opened up her heart now. The matters of the world are truly impossible to predict. Yun Lanxing seemed to have the numerous events of the past, and his expression was filled with emotion as well. Bing-Shirtian's eyes were suffused with a trace of confidence as he shook his head and said, Junior brother Yun, you worried too much. Once senior sister Qing recovers the memories of her previous lifetime, she'll understand that no one in this world can replace my position in her heart. So what if she has someone she loves? It's only an illusion in the end. When he saw Bing-Shirtian reveal such an expression, Yun Lanxing's heart sank instead, and he sighed. Senior brother Bing, the situation this time is different. Senior sister Qing has... Bing-Shirtian was obviously stunned, and he said with a frown, Junior brother Yun, you've already attained the 8th level of the earthly immortal realm now, yet you're so irresolute and hesitant. It's slightly disappointing. His voice already carried a trace of severe criticism. Yun Lanxing laughed bitterly without end and stayed silent for a long time before he gritted his teeth and said, "Supposedly, long ago when senior sister Qing was in the Darchu dynasty, she'd already given birth to a son for that person." Bang! Before he could finish speaking, the tablet before Bing Shirtian had exploded abruptly, causing the Go pieces to spray out in all directions and all over the floor, and they emitted a rapid and chaotic wave of sound. Bing Shirtian's handsome face didn't have a trace of a smile on it any longer, and it was completely icy cold as he stood up slowly. Accompanying his rise, an extremely terrifying aura suddenly suffused the hall and rose steadily, causing the air to become chaotic and violent as it whistled out towards the surroundings, and it blasted apart everything in the hall and caused the entire floor to be in a mess. At this instant, the entire hall was trembling intensely and was on the verge of collapse. Moreover, everything in the world outside the hall seemed to have noticed Bing Shirtian's rage, causing the wind to whistle furiously as the heavens and the earth was cast into a shade, and an aura that caused horror to arise in the hearts of all spread out and enveloped the entire world. The cultivators in the entirety of Primeval City felt this terrifying aura, and their hearts shook as unease crept throughout their bodies as it felt as if doomsday was at hand. "Senior brother, calm your rage." The nearby Yun Lanxing was greatly alarmed and hurriedly calmed Bing Shirtian down. However, at the instant he encountered Bing Shirtian's gaze, he instantly shuddered in fear. What sort of gaze is that? Icy cold and deep, indifferent and emotionless. A furious sea of flames roiled within it like lava, blazing and surging, as if it wanted to annihilate everything and cause the heavens and the earth to be destroyed eternally. "What's his name?" asked Bing Shirtian with a calm voice. However, beneath the calmness of his voice was boundless ghastly streams of coldness surging about, and it caused others to feel as if they'd fallen into an icy pit. "Chan Shi." This time Yun Lanxing answered very readily. "Senior sister Qing cares extremely about him." "Oh? So it's him." Shocking phenomena and an awe-inspiring glow appeared in Bing Shirtian's eyes, and he recalled the scenes he experienced before the War Soul tablet. "Senior brother, this kid's potential is shocking indeed. He has overcome the Phoenix tribulation of rebirth and has once defeated a heavenly immortal's decree and will. Moreover, he almost uprooted the entire Shang clan by himself. Such strength can already be considered to be at the top amongst those of the same generation." Yun Lanxing explained from the side. "Presently, the 9 Radiance Sword Sect's Madman Lu has come looking especially for him, and he seemed to have been entrusted with this by the Violet Thistle Mountains by clan." "Enough!" Bing Shirtian suddenly turned around with an electrifying gaze as he waved his hand to interrupt Yun Lanxing. "I'll make my own decisions. There's no need for you to speak any further." Yun Lanxing sighed in his heart, yet he still couldn't help but warn. "Senior brother, I only want to say that senior sister Qing cares extremely about Chan Shi. If you make a move against him, then I'm afraid." At this instant, Bing Shirtian calmed down instead. No matter how furious he was in his heart or how he wished for nothing more than to annihilate Chan Shi right now, he forcefully endured it in the end. He knew that Yun Lanxing was correct. The person he cared the most about was senior sister Qing, and if he caused his senior sister Qing to feel resentment towards him just because of an ant, it wouldn't be worth it. But he was absolutely unable to endure this forever. As a heavenly immortal, the woman he admired in his heart had actually been seized away by a tiny ant from the mortal world, and this was simply a terrible humiliation that he would be unable to vent without killing the ant. "Senior sister, do you know that I once vowed all those years ago that no one in this world will be unable to obtain you if I can't?" Bing Shirtian's mutters drifted within the empty hall, and his voice was calm, yet revealed a cold and murderous feeling. "Northeast area." Chan Shi hesitated over and over again before taking a deep breath and trying hard to make himself look slightly calmer. And then he walked forward and raised his hand to lightly knock the door. After a short moment, the door opened to reveal Qing Shui's jade-white and peerlessly beautiful face, and she seemed to be utterly not surprised at seeing Chan Shi before she turned around to walk into the room. Chan Shi had originally prepared numerous methods For example, what he would say and what expression he would reveal when Qing Shui opened the door so that he would look more natural. However, he never imagined that Qing Shui would actually seem as if she'd expected he would arrive. And she turned around to walk into the room as soon as she opened the door and utterly didn't give him a chance to make some small talk. But he came to an understanding with a quick thought. Qing Shui's character had always been like this, and it would be strange if she suddenly started making small talk with him. Qing Shui's room was extremely simply, and a trace of light and refreshing fragrance drifted in the air. "Why did you come looking for me?" After they were seated, Qing Shui asked directly. Her jet-black hair was graceful and she wore a fringed dress, causing her to possess an extraordinary bearing that seemed aloof from the world like an otherworldly celestial maiden. "The immortal emissary has arrived." She pondered for a moment. He looked at Qing Shui as he spoke, and he just happened to be able to clearly see her delicate and peerlessly beautiful face from this distance. "I know," Qing Shui replied with a nod. Her attitude was calm and even possessed a trace of indifference, and she seemed as if she'd utterly not taken this matter to heart. She was stunned and continued. "That person is Bing Shirtian. He's supposedly your junior brother from your past life." "I know." Qing Shui repeated the same answer, and her attitude was still indifferent. Could it be that you don't have any other feelings? I heard he pursued you crazily all those years ago." She was truly unable to endure it, and he asked the question he was the most concerned about. Qing Shui raised her eyes to look right at before she replied with a question. "If my past lifetime and this lifetime was a continuation, then why would I choose rebirth and to cultivate again?" She was stunned when he heard this, and then he suddenly started laughing extremely happily. "I understand. You cultivate at ease. I'll take my leave first." As he spoke, she had already risen and left excitedly. He utterly didn't notice that at the instant he walked out of the door, the gaze that stared at him from behind was suffused with a trace of imperceptible gentleness. Love was like a pair of silk fishing nets with a myriad of knots in between. Why walk back and forth uneasily when fate will decide in the end? Half a month later, on this day, an expanse of dark clouds that were like a piece of lead suddenly gushed out into the originally clear sky, and it blotted out the sky, causing the heavens and the earth to seem as if it had suddenly fallen into the darkness of night. The wind had suddenly started whistling furiously and emitting roars that were like the rumbling of muffled thunderclaps as it swept through the heavens and the earth, causing sand and rocks to fly up as both dust and dirt surged into the air. The violent winds raged as the dark clouds pressed down upon the city. An indescribably oppressive aura suddenly suffused the heavens and the earth and enveloped the hearts of every single person, and it seemed as if a shocking and unexpected event was about to occur, causing the hearts of everyone to become restless and feel uneasy. "The sky has gone dark." Madman Lu raised his head, and his muddled and intoxicated eyes were suffused with a strand of a piercingly cold sheen. She was silent, yet he felt slightly curious in his heart. After Bing Shirtian arrived at Primeval City half a month ago, he seemed to have evaporated into thin air and had never made an appearance again. Nor did he come looking for Qing Shui. These sort of unusual actions caused she to faintly have a slight feeling of uneasiness in his heart. But he was powerless to change anything. What he could do was merely to cultivate painstakingly and make the best use of every single minute to raise his own strength. Bang! 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 Right at this moment, it seemed like a powerful army was approaching in an orderly expanse outside Primeval City, and the heavy sound of footsteps shook the heavens and the earth to the point of trembling violently. "What a ferocious aura!" Shi's expression went grim as he soared up into the sky. He saw countless beams of black qi charging into the sky in the distance, and the black qi seemed to contain numerous black-colored dragons that roared as they soared up into the sky. The heavens and the earth were covered in expanses of pitch-black darkness, and the spirit energy and spirit veins seemed to have been removed, causing the earth to transform into a decaying swamp in the blink of an eye. Moreover, there vaguely seemed to be group after group of cavalries flying within the black mist. They wore pitch-black armor, helmets, and halberds, and even the horses beneath them were suffused with strands of pitch-black and dense mist, causing them to seem like the mounts of specters, When looked at from afar, the groups of cavalries covered the heavens and the earth like tidewater that gushed over form the extremely distant horizon, and they charged over in a formidable array that emitted a ferocious aura that shot into the sky. At this moment, it wasn't just Xianxia that flew into the sky to look over towards the distance. All the cultivators within Primeval City had been alarmed by this and done the same as well, and all of them revealed anxious and shocked expressions. My God! What's that? What sort of monsters are those? They've actually formed an army. What a terrifying and ferocious aura. Why do such creatures exist in the primeval battlefield? Could it be that this is the shocking and unexpected event the emissaries spoke of? The entire primeval city was like a lone isle that floated in the ocean, isolated and helpless, whereas the armored cavalry covered the heavens and the earth as they gushed over from all directions like a black-colored torrent that exploded towards the city, and it was an extremely shocking sight. Emissaries of the Dark Reverie, swiftly lead the cultivators in your area to defend the city gate and resist the enemies. Suddenly, a clear and long howl resounded out into the 9 heavens, and it enveloped the entire heavens and the earth as it reverberated in the ears of all. Accompanying this voice was a tall figure that appeared in midair. The figure emitted a myriad of rays of dazzling golden light, causing him to seem like an extremely blazing and enormous sun that looked down upon the world with peerless divine might. Shockingly, it was the immortal emissary Bing-Shirtian. At the instant he made an appearance, he was like a divine pillar of support that instantly dispelled the nervousness in the hearts of all the cultivators, and he brought assurance and light to the hearts of everyone. He's Bing-Shirtian? Xianxia looked over and only saw an extremely dazzling ball of light, yet was unable to see how exactly Bing-Shirtian looked like. Swoosh! Right at this moment, Bing-Shirtian seemed to have noticed Xianxia's gaze, and as his eyes blinked, strands of brilliant bolts of lightning erupted out from them as he swept his gaze towards Xianxia. Instantly, Xianxia felt a piercing pain in his eyes as breathing became difficult for him, and it was like an enormous mountain had pressed down upon him and shook him to the point even his soul couldn't help but tremble. The might emitted by Bing-Shirtian was simply terrifying to the extreme. Bing-Shirtian was absolutely the most formidable enemy Xianxia had encountered since he started cultivating. Before long, Bing-Shirtian had moved his gaze away, causing Xianxia to heave a sigh of relief in his heart while laughing bitterly in his heart. This love rival of mine is really formidable. Meanwhile, the over 10 emissaries of the Dark Reverie had moved out to flash towards the city gates in all 8 directions. The final test was about to begin. Rumble! The cavalry dashed out like a powerful torrent that surged and rumbled before stopping right in front of the city gates. In the entire field of everyone's vision, the distant heavens and the earth were already covered in surging pitch black and fiendish chi that blotted out the sky and was terrifying to the extreme. The heavens and the earth seemed to have fallen into eternal darkness. Every 100 years, a shocking event would occur in the primeval battlefield, and what all of you see are the Spectre cavalry from the primeval battlefield. During the primeval times, the gods had led an expedition here, and the target of their attack was the xenorace experts that came from outside the dimension. After these experts fell, their resentment remained and couldn't be annihilated, and they formed into these Spectre cavalry. The strength of these Spectre cavalry are roughly at the rebirth realm, and they formed an enormous and almost boundless army. Your missions are to defend the city gate and exert every effort to kill these xenorace experts. Moreover, this is the final test of the primeval battlefield. Yun Lanxing stood before the northeast city gate with fluttering snow-white hair as he pointed towards the surging most of cavalry in the distance as he spoke with confidence and composure. Meanwhile, no less than 100 over-cultivators had gathered before the northeast city gate, and not only were Xianxia and the others present, even the experts of the other dynasties were present. These experts were from the ordinary dynasties and had no enmity with the Darchu dynasty, so they were able to obtain the permission of Xianxia and the others to stay in the Northeast dynasty. Presently, the final test of the primeval battlefield had begun, and they naturally were unable to escape the responsibility of joining the forces of Xianxia and the others to defend the Northeast city gate together. The situation at the other 7 city gates was the same. Of course, they could choose to not participate. But if they acted in this way, they would undoubtedly lose the qualifications to receive the final test, and it would be impossible for them to enter the dark reverie. So none of the cultivators in the city dared to slack off or take a passive stance. Conversely, all of them were bursting with energy as they hoped to fully display their abilities in this last moment to draw the attention of the emissaries of the dark reverie and smoothly enter the dark reverie. However, after they heard Yunlanqing's introduction, the mood of everyone including Xianxia and the others became extremely heavy. What a joke! The armored cavalry that seemed to form a city outside the city were formed from the resentment of the xenorace experts. Moreover, every single one of them had cultivations at the rebirth realm. Not to mention these rebirth realm experts, even if cultivators of a higher realm were to arrive here, they would probably not dare say with certainty that they would be able to survive this vast army. All of you don't have to be worried. Once the battle begins, a weapon of the gods will appear in every one of these 8 great areas to defend the city gate and assist all of you in dealing with most of the enemy forces, said Yunlanqing. The expression of everyone eased up when they heard this, as the presence of the weapons of the gods was relieving indeed. Yunlanqing smiled lightly, and then his expression went serious while he looked coldly towards the extreme distance with a gaze that seemed like bolts of lightning. As for emissaries like me, we'll hold down the defenses in all 8 areas and deter the formidable existences amongst the enemy forces. So all of you don't have to worry about this at all. And all of you can fight with your full strengths once the Spectre cavalry charge over. Emissary, may I know if our lives will be in danger? A cultivator suddenly asked from within the crowd. Yunlanqing glanced at the person and said indifferently, "This is a real battle, so what do you think?" Everyone went silent. Just think about it, this was the final test of the primeval battlefield. A large-scale battle, and death was impossible to avoid. Right at this moment, an extremely vast fluctuation suddenly stretched out in the sky above Primeval City, and then 8 exceedingly dazzling divine lights surged out explosively from the 8 areas of the city. When looked at from afar, it seemed like 8 beams of light were charging into the sky, and they were both thick and dazzling as they stirred the winds and the clouds, causing the dark clouds that enveloped the sky above the city to be shattered and reveal the clear sky once again. The weapons of the gods have emerged. Yunlanqing swiftly turned his head around. Even with his state of mind, his heart couldn't help but tremble slightly when he saw the emergence of the weapons of the gods that had been sealed in the ground throughout the ages. A myriad of divine lights surged into the skies as auspicious chi roiled, and the entire ancient primeval city was bathed in an expanse of glowing divinity, and it seemed to be sacred and mighty. Those were 8 weapons of the gods that had once fought the world along with the gods, and they'd been tainted by the blood of the gods and slaughtered xenorace experts. Now, when they emerged once again into the world, the ancient and vast fluctuation they emitted still caused the hearts of everyone to be unable to help but be awed. Xianxia raised his eyes to look over, and he saw the weapons of the gods in the sky were enveloped by blazing rays of light that were suffused with glowing divinity, causing Xianxia to be unable to see them clearly. But merely from the grand phenomena they emitted, it was sufficient to prove exactly how formidable these weapons were, and they were absolutely more formidable than immortal artifacts. Swoosh! 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 The 8 weapons of the gods seemed as if they possessed intelligence as they spread out to fly towards the 8 city gates. Right at this moment, Xianxia suddenly saw a weapon descend before the northeast city gate like a shooting star, and it enveloped Huangfu Qingying's figure. It was a beast skin war drum the size of a wash basin with flora, fauna, stellar bodies, and mysterious markings inscribed on it, and it was suffused with faint strands of divinity that caused one to be awed by the sight of it. Kuei ox drum! Yunlanqing cried out in admiration, and his eyes couldn't help but be suffused with a trace of burning desire. During the primeval times, there was a terrifying ferocious beast that had the outward appearance of a dragon and roared like thunder, and it was called the Kuei ox. Its roar could shake the heavens and the stars, move a myriad of mountains, and it was extremely terrifying. This Kuei ox drum was refined from the skin of a Kuei ox, and the Tao markings on it were those that the Kuei ox possessed innately. A light drum of it would emit a divine blast that sounded like thunder. Not only was it capable of shaking enemies to death, It can even raise the morale of one's own side to erupt with boundless potential, causing it to absolutely be an extremely formidable weapon of the gods. Everyone couldn't help but exclaim repeatedly with admiration when they heard this, and they felt extreme envy towards Huang Fuqingying. Since she was able to obtain the acknowledgement of the battle vow tablet, this Kuei ox drum naturally belonged to her, and others were utterly incapable of seizing it away. Even if they annihilated her, the Kuei ox drum would automatically vanish. The Spectre Cavalry have arrived. All of you prepare for battle. Right at this moment, Yun Lanqing suddenly shouted out explosively. The hearts of everyone shook as they raised their eyes to look over. Sure enough, they saw the formidable array of armored Spectre cavalry dashing out with halberds in hand from within the surging black mist. Murderous chi shot in the sky as they surged over like a torrent, and merely the ferocious imposing aura that covered the heavens and the earth as they moved was sufficient to shatter the courage of their enemies. The battle erupted with a bang. Everywhere that met the eye were countless magic treasures and brilliant flowing lights flying about chaotically. The heavens and the earth outside the city gate were covered in surging black clothes and chaotic flows of air, as the sounds of battle and collisions reverberated in the heavens and the earth like thunder. The Spectre cavalries wore pitch-black armor and helmets with black-colored steeds beneath them, and the weapons within their hands were condensed from fiendish chi. These weapons were extremely terrifying, and they tore apart space and caused fiendish chi to erupt with every swing. They seemed like an orderly army that charged in rows, and they were swift, ferocious, fearless of death, and swept through everything before them. In practically the time of a few breaths, they'd already pressed down onto the city gate. Dong! The sound of a drum resounded out like the sound of a dragon roar, and it contained a terrifying aura that could crush everything before it. It stretched out with a bang and shattered expanse after expanse of Spectre cavaliers everywhere it passed without leaving a single one behind. It was the Kuei ox drum. It resided before the city gate with talisman markings surging on its surface, and it was suffused with the glow of a myriad of divinity as it drummed out sounds that seemed like thunderclaps. A single strike annihilated over 100 Spectre cavaliers. However, there were truly too many Spectres. They formed a dense mass that covered the heavens and the earth, and the death of over 100 was only like a splash within the ocean, and it was utterly nothing. Kill! 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 Numerous figures charged out of the city gate along with the Kuei ox drum to go against the army of Spectres. The sound of drumming was like collapsing thunder as the battle resounded out like raindrops, and the entire heavens and the earth was suffused with dust and filled with the terrifying scene of blood spraying out like rain. All these experts from the various dynasties knew that this was a test that would allow them to enter the dark reverie smoothly if they suffered through it, and if they didn't, then the icy cold earth would be their final resting place. So all of them spared no effort and didn't dare hold back in the slightest, nor did they dare shrink back in the slightest. Chun Shi and the others were no exception as well. Pooh! The talisman armament soared through the sky, causing over 10 Spectre cavaliers to be directly slashed flying before exploding into balls of fiendish chi that vanished without a trace. All these Spectre cavaliers were formed from the remaining resentment of the Xenorace experts, and they didn't have flesh or blood. After they perished, they would transform into fiendish chi that returned to the heavens and the earth. Bang! The talisman armament spun around like the tail of a dragon, and vast sword chi stretched out to shatter another few tens of Spectre cavaliers. Meanwhile, Xianxia had simply transformed into a maleficent existence that rampaged within the army of Spectres, and his sword chi was like a rainbow that swept through everything before it, to the point there was practically nothing that could withstand a blow of his. How satisfying! After the talisman armament advanced, its might is even more formidable than the quasi-immortal artifact, Sky Sorrow Sword. Xianxia exclaimed endlessly with surprise as he felt the shocking lethality of the talisman armament. After all, every single Spectre cavalier possessed a strength comparable to a rebirth realm expert. Presently, all of them were completely slaughtered by the talisman armament as if it was slicing through melons. So how could such a might not cause Xianxia to be pleasantly surprised? He was already able to be certain that the current might of the talisman armament was more formidable than a quasi-immortal artifacts. Such a waste. Right when Xianxia was slaughtering everything around him, the tiny cauldron suddenly spoke to him via voice transmission. If you continue slaughtering like this, then you'll probably be unable to gain any benefit. Xianxia was shocked in his heart, and he blasted away the row of specter cavaliers before him and seized this gap to ask the tiny cauldron, "What do you mean by this? Could it be that these specter cavaliers have some sort of treasure?" All these specter cavaliers were formed from the resentment of xenorace experts. However, all of them were able to remain eternally in the boundless years that had passed. Do you know why? The tiny cauldron seemed to not look forward to Xianxia giving it the correct answer as well, and it answered its own question. It's very simple, because there's a trace of divinity within the resentment that's almost eternal, and it's greatly beneficial to your cultivation if you devour it. Xianxia was shocked in his heart, and then he slashed a specter cavalier to death right away before carefully inspecting it. Sure enough, amidst the fiendish chi that shattered apart was a trace of an extremely weak sheen, and he stretched out his hand to grab it right away. Instantly, this trace of divinity transformed into a strand of warmth that gushed into his dantian before being absorbed by his rebirth wheel, and it caused Xianxia to clearly sense a trace of an eternal aura actually appear on his rebirth wheel. It was even to the extent that even his strength seemed to have increased. Even though it was only a very tiny trace, it was already sufficiently shocking. What a treasure! Not only is it capable of allowing my rebirth wheel to undergo a qualitative change, it's actually so beneficial to my cultivation. It really is a waste of God's given gifts if I waste it. Xianxia exclaimed with shock in his heart. Moreover, with a glance, he noticed the others in the distance were gathering those traces of divinity as they fought. Obviously, they'd noticed exactly what sort of benefit this energy gave their cultivation since long ago. Looks like I have to make a move as soon as possible. Xianxia kept the talisman armament away right away, and then his shaman energy surged as he instantly transformed into an over 10 kilometers tall giant that had 3 heads and 6 arms. Rumble! Balls of thunderstorms flashed with lightning as they rumbled and flew around him, causing him to seem like a devil god born from lightning, and he stood on the spot while swinging his hand out to instantly blast out countless thunderstorm vortexes that whistled as they expanded. The impetus of his attack was simply like the impetus of a landslide or tidal wave, and it enveloped all the specter cavaliers in the nearby 30 kilometers around him. Instantly, all of them were obliterated and blasted apart into surging fiendish chi. Swish! 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 On the other hand, the strands of divinity that remained were devoured by the thunderstorm vortexes and transformed into a myriad of streams that gushed into Xianxia's body, causing his cultivation to instantly rise explosively. Moreover, he noticed that this divinity similarly possessed an extremely miraculous effect towards his body, and it caused the meridians and flesh in his entire body to actually carry a trace of a faint eternal aura as well, as expected of a race that battled the gods. The strength they possessed is actually so miraculous. I truly wonder how explosively my cultivation would rise if I devour a real xenorace expert. Xianxia exclaimed with shock in his heart, yet he didn't slow down in the slightest. He was like a devil god that emitted a terrifying and monstrous aura with every movement, and he possessed an overbearing, imposing aura of dominance. But no matter how many specter cavaliers he annihilated, there were still even more specter cavaliers gushing over from the distance, and they really did seem to be boundless. If it was any other cultivator, the person would probably die of exhaustion. But after he obtained the replenishment of the divinity, Xianxia's strength was replenished endlessly, and he didn't show any signs of exhaustion. Moreover, along with the passage of time, his body refinement and chi refinement cultivations had actually attained the tune tempering of the rebirth realm. Such a speed of advancement even shocked Xianxia himself. It was too swift, as his cultivation had advanced a level in less than the time for an incense stick to burn. If news of this were to be spread, there would absolutely be no one that dared believe it. Thus, exactly how heaven-defying the magical effect divinity possessed was obvious from this. There's someone pinned down ahead. Suddenly, Xianxia inadvertently glanced over and saw a few cultivators had been pinned down by a group of specter cavaliers in the distance. What caused him to be shocked was the armor, helmet, weapons, and mounts of these specter cavaliers was actually completely crimson red in color like blazing flames. Moreover, the auras of these cavaliers were even more formidable than the specter cavaliers he'd seen earlier. Every single move they made caused fiendish chi to surge, and they actually executed a variety of Dao-grade martial techniques. According to what Yun Lanxing said, there was a difference in strength within this army of specters. For example, the completely pitch-black specter cavaliers had a strength that was comparable to an ordinary rebirth realm cultivator, and above it were crimson flame cavaliers, gold-plate cavaliers, mammoth cavaliers, and specter war generals. The strength of a crimson flame cavalier was already comparable to a fifth tempering rebirth realm cultivator. A gold-plate cavalier was comparable to a sixth tempering rebirth realm cultivator. A mammoth cavalier's strength was already on par with a perfection stage rebirth realm cultivator. Finally, a specter war general was a core figure amongst the army of specters and possessed a strength that could already compare with an earthly immortal realm expert. Comparatively speaking, the amount of specter cavaliers was the most. They were like a vast ocean, dense and innumerable. On the other hand, crimson flame cavaliers were inferior in number to it, but they were mixed within the army like the squad leaders of a mortal army, yet their numbers weren't few either. Further up above them was the gold-plate cavaliers and mammoth cavaliers. They were the elite forces within the army and were very few in number. Normally, they would be holding the line from behind the army, and they wouldn't easily assume a forward assault position. Spectre war generals, on the other hand, practically wouldn't make an appearance unless they encountered an extremely great unexpected event. For example, the reason Yun Lanxing and the other emissaries that resided in the city hadn't made a move was for the sake of deterring the Spectre war generals, causing them to take caution and not dare act rashly. In the distance, a group of Crimson Flame Cavaliers pinned down a few cultivators like a tide. These Crimson Flame Cavaliers wore armor, helmets, weapons, and mounts that were completely crimson red like fire, and they emitted a monstrous and ferocious aura. Every single Crimson Flame Cavalier seemed to be enveloped within the flames of hell, cruel, violent, and bloody. Moreover, their strengths were extremely formidable. The weapons in their hands executed various Dao-grade martial techniques that tore through the sky while erupting with powerful and mighty force. A shrill cry sounded out. A female cultivator amongst the few pinned-down cultivators reacted slightly slowly, causing her to be struck by the pike of a Crimson Flame Cavalier at her side, and the skin on her stomach was directly pierced open as it flicked her flying and caused blood to spray. In the blink of an eye, her body was completely penetrated amidst her miserable and shrill cry, and she lost all signs of life. Bang! The Crimson Flame Cavalier stuck out his hand and made a grabbing motion, causing the glow of flames to surge into the sky as it incinerated the corpse of the female cultivator, and her corpse was transformed into a wisp of fiendish chi that gushed into the body of the Crimson Flame Cavalier. Instantly, this Crimson Flame Cavalier's strength actually rose slightly. In other words, cultivators were able to increase their cultivations via the trace of divinity obtained after killing these specters, and conversely, these specters were similarly capable of increasing their strength after killing cultivators. Damn it! Fucking bastards! The other cultivators were completely furious, and some of them were unable to restrain themselves any longer and intended to break out of the encirclement. However, they were directly slashed to death by the joint attacks of over 10 Crimson Flame Cavaliers before transforming into fiendish chi that was devoured by them. Retreat together. These Crimson Flame Cavaliers are too formidable and are not something we're capable of going against. We just have to escape into the city, and we'll be entirely able to be rescued with the weapon of the gods present there. The cultivator howled loudly. Humph! Rescued? This time, the weapons of the gods will be annihilated as well. Right at this moment, a wisp of brilliant golden light shot over explosively. This was a cavalier that wore golden armor and was completely bathed in golden light. It possessed a formidable aura and fiendish chi that seemed material, and it shook the surrounding space to the point of trembling endlessly. Shockingly, this was a gold-plate cavalier, and its strength was sufficient to compare with a perfection stage rebirth realm cultivator. Most shocking of it all was it was actually capable of speaking. Obviously, he already possessed some intelligence and had a rather high status. Spare none. Torture and kill all these cultivators before extracting their souls to strengthen your cultivations. This time, We must capture Primeval City. All the Crimson Flame Cavaliers roared murderously as they charged forward once more. Shit! Flee! Quickly! The cultivators roared madly as they fled with all their might. Can you? The gold-plate cavalier grunted coldly as an icy cold and brutal expression suffused his golden eyes, and then he swung the golden spear in his hand, causing it to instantly transform into an expanse of golden clouds that were 300 m in size and covered the heavens and the earth as it enveloped down. Rumble! The peerlessly sharp golden cloud that was lofty like a mountain crushed down from midair, and it contained terrifying metal grand Tao profundities within it, causing those cultivators to be enveloped within it before they even had the time to flee. Crack! When the cultivators were about to be completely annihilated, a bolt of lightning suddenly swept down from the sky and directly tore apart the golden cloud, and then it enveloped all the cultivators within it before it actually rescued all of them. After that, a figure that could compare to a mountain descended from the sky. The figure had 3 heads and 6 arms and had thunder rumbling all over him, causing him to seem like a devil god, and it was precisely Xianxia who'd rushed over after noticing what had happened. It's actually a gold-plate cavalier. I never expected that it would appear here. Xianxia was surprised. According to his knowledge, gold-plate cavaliers and mammoth cavaliers were holding the line at the back of the army, and they wouldn't easily assume a forward assault position, so he never expected he would encounter one here. It's the Darchu dynasty's Xianxia. The cultivators started cheering with joy when they saw Xianxia, as they knew their savior had arrived. All of them wore clothes of various colors and were experts from the various dynasties that had charged out from the northeast city gate along with the disciples of the Darchu dynasty. So how could they not know Xianxia's reputation? He was a formidable existence that had obtained the first place on the Warsoul tablet and had almost uprooted the prestigious clan of an ancient kingdom, the Shang clan, by himself. All of them instantly heaved a sigh of relief when they saw Xianxia appear, and they knew they were saved this time. This place isn't too safe. All of you should return to fight before the city gate. Xianxia glanced at these people and noticed most of them were covered in injuries, and he knew that if he didn't rush over in time, they'd probably have lost their lives since long ago. Humph! An initial stage rebirth realm body refiner? You've come at just the right time. The flesh of a body refiner is a supreme delicacy, and devouring you is sufficient to allow my strength to raise a level. This time, all of you can dream of leaving. Suddenly, a cold grunt sounded out. The gold-plate cavalier pointed the golden spear in his hand at Xianxia while looking arrogantly at Xianxia, and a terrifying golden light exploded out from his entire body, as if he was a volcano that would erupt at any moment, causing him to emit an oppressive, imposing aura. The group of Crimson Flame Cavaliers who were attacking had stopped as well, and their gazes revealed a cruel and bloodthirsty expression of greed as they gazed at Xianxia's body that could compare to a mountain. Fellow Taoist Xianxia, be careful. The strength of this gold-plate cavalier is comparable to the 6th tempering of the rebirth realm. Why don't we retreat back to the city first before doing anything? A cultivator spoke via voice transmission. Right, it's difficult for 2 fists to go against 4. The 30-plus Crimson Flame Cavaliers nearby are extremely troublesome as well, and all of them possess cultivations at the 5th tempering of the rebirth realm. We can't take them by force. The others sent voice transmissions successively with worried expressions. Xianxia's strength was clear to all, yet they were currently within the army of specters, and their enemies formed a dense mass and possessed exceedingly ferocious strengths. If they were to be delayed here, then even if they were able to annihilate these enemies before them, it would probably be impossible for them to break out of the encirclement at that time. After all, could anyone guarantee another gold-plate cavalier wouldn't appear? There's no need for such trouble. All of you stay back for a while, and I'll open up a path to safety for all of you. Xianxia waved his hand as he took a step forward, and it caused the earth to tremble. What? You want to fight alone? The gold-plate cavalier grunted coldly with disdain. Xianxia's expression remained unchanged as he suddenly raised his hand to strike out. Rumble! A grand astral palm soared out and blotted out the sky. Unlike before, as soon as the grand astral palm appeared this time, the myriad of stars that circulated within the striations of the palm and the divine lightning of the 5 elements had completely interwoven together, and they revolved violently to form an extremely thick vortex. This vortex simply seemed like a black hole that had surged out into appearance in the depths of the universe. It was deep and silent, and it actually remained soundless as it revolved. However, it was precisely because it was too silent that it seemed to be extremely terrifying instead. At the instant it appeared, it seemed to have devoured the entire heavens and the earth within the area it covered, and any light, airflow, or dust instantly vanished, causing the world to transform into an extreme black. Pitch black. Everyone felt their vision go black as if they'd fallen into a bottomless abyss, and they were actually unable to see anything, causing them to seem as if they'd become blind and were unable to see any color. The expression of the gold-plate cavalier went grim as he sensed an extremely dangerous aura, and he was just about to dodge when an irresistible devouring force imprisoned his body before directly crushing him. After that, the grand astral palm made a grabbing motion as it blotted out the sky and enveloped down towards the other Crimson Flame Cavaliers. Instantly, all of them were obliterated and crushed into an expanse of fiendish chi. In merely a single attack, he'd crushed the gold-plate cavalier into powder, whereas the remaining Crimson Flame Cavaliers were swept into the vortex and crushed into fiendish chi. Such might was simply the best display of might that was all-powerful and swept through everything before it. When the group of cultivators saw this scene, they were completely and utterly stunned on the spot, and they almost forgot to breathe. They knew exactly how formidable these Crimson Flame Cavaliers were, as the Crimson Cavaliers had been pursuing and pinning them down all the way here. Actually, they were like rats that were being toyed with by cats, and the Crimson Flame Cavaliers were enjoying the joy of torturing them, because if they really made a move, these cultivators would have been annihilated long ago. Especially the Gold-Plate Cavalier. He was even more formidable than the Crimson Flame Cavalier and even possessed some intelligence. Obviously, he was an expert in the army of specters. However, now all of them were annihilated by a single palm print of Xianxia's, and this intense visual impact shocked them to the point their eyes almost fell out of their sockets. It was too terrifying. If they didn't see it with their own eyes, they wouldn't dare believe that a rebirth realm cultivator was actually capable of executing such a terrifying attack even if they were bashed to death. Sure enough, the divinity contained within these Crimson Flame Cavaliers is more than 10 times stronger than ordinary Spectre Cavaliers. The strands of divinity that the 30-plus Crimson Flame Cavaliers transformed into after being blasted apart were devoured by Xianxia, and every single strand of divinity was pure, thick, and surging with energy. At the instant these strands of divinity gushed into his body, they instantly caused Xianxia's cultivation to advance greatly once more. Especially the divinity from within the body of the Gold-Plate Cavalier, it was actually suffused with a strand of a golden aura that was sacred and eternal. As soon as it gushed into his body, it caused his limbs, bones, flesh, and apertures to be tainted with a trace of an eternal and sacred glow, and his cultivation rose steadily and explosively as well. In just the time of a few breaths, Xianxia's cultivation had actually once again displayed the signs of being on the verge of breakthrough. After all, Xianxia's body refinement and chi refinement cultivation had just advanced to the second tempering of the rebirth realm before he came to rescue these cultivators. Now, it actually showed signs of advancing again, and this caused Xianxia himself to almost not dare believe it.